Long before the Fire Kingdom rose into the blazing empire that would define centuries of elemental tension in U, the essence of fire already existed. It lived as a force older than recorded memory, older than the kingdoms that would one day rise and fall, older even than the political structures that later shaped U's history. Fire did not begin as a nation. It began as a primordial instinct, an ancient presence that pulsed at the heart of creation. The Fire Kingdom we recognize, with its rulers, towers, citizens, and upheavals, is the final form of a force that once existed, without borders, without hierarchy, and without language. To understand how the Fire Kingdom rose, one must first understand what fire represented in the earliest ages of the world. Fire is one of the 4 primal elements, along with ice, candy, and slime. These elements existed long before modern civilizations. They shaped the landscape through cycles of rise, imbalance, and renewal. In every era, each element carried a specific emotional and metaphysical tone. For fire, this tone was passion, volatility, transformation, destruction, and rebirth. Fire in its earliest state had no ruler because it did not require one. It behaved like a natural force, spreading freely, consuming what it touched, reshaping environments, and then receding when its energy settled. The beings born from this first era of fire were not like the fire people we know. They were raw manifestations of elemental identity. Some were towering giants made of molten stone, their bodies shifting like living volcanoes. Others were drifting clouds of sparks that behaved more like storms than individuals. Some existed only as flashes of living heat that moved across the land. These early fire entities had no single form or function. They acted according to instinct, carried forward by the primal force that drove their very existence. As the world developed, the elements began to form proto-societies, not kingdoms as we understand them, but loosely organized clusters of beings shaped by shared instinct. Fire gatherings consisted of groups that settled in volcanic regions and used their elemental nature to carve out caverns and molten chambers. These clusters changed constantly. Some dissolved when their heat waned. Others grew as new fire entities rose from magma and flame. None of these clusters resembled true political structures. They were communities created by instinct rather than governance. This early formation of fire society planted the seeds for what would one day become the Fire Kingdom. Understanding this primal era is essential because it explains the emotional foundation that still influences the Fire Kingdom in modern OO. Fire does not naturally gravitate toward stability. It gravitates toward growth, conflict, passion, and change. These traits continued even when the fire people began forming more organized systems. Fire's volatility became the basis for political tension, succession struggles, and cultural expectations in the future kingdom. In order to understand the rise of the Fire Kingdom, one must first understand fire not as a place, but as a personality that shaped the beings who embodied it. The rise of structured kingdoms in U was gradual. Over time, the elemental societies that had drifted through the Earth's natural cycles began to settle. Ice formed a kingdom of isolation and endurance. Candy formed communities defined by hospitality and order. Slime formed regions of fluid hierarchy and constant restructuring. Fire, however, was slow to stabilize. Its earliest leaders were not rulers as much as they were powerful figures, capable of gathering clusters of fire beings around common goals or shared aggression. These early fire leaders shaped the culture that eventually evolved into the Fire Kingdom. They valued strength above all else. A leader was not chosen for wisdom or strategy. A leader emerged because others feared or respected their intensity. Fire society in this era did not fear the potential for destruction. It embraced it. The destruction of an old leader often acted as a form of renewal. When a new fire entity rose in power, the community shifted to support them. These transitions were violent, but they were also natural extensions of fire's identity. Over many cycles, the fire entities began to create structures that served their needs. Lava channels became pathways, magma pools became gathering spaces, hardened basalt cliffs became walls. These structures marked the first signs of what would later grow into a kingdom. The fire beings did not yet understand governance, but they understood territory. They knew how to defend their homes, how to expand their influence, and how to claim new volcanic grounds. Territory became the foundation of early fire politics. Control of heat, magma, and volcanic power shaped the early hierarchy. As time passed, the nature of fire beings changed. New generations were smaller, more stable, more humanoid. These modern fire people emerged through elemental evolution, shaped by eras of adaptation. The towering giants became rare. The drifting spark clouds diminished. The molten beasts grew less common. Instead, fire society grew around beings with clear forms, distinct personalities, and the ability to build, plan, and communicate. These shifts marked the transition from primal fire existence into early civilization. During this transition, the first proto-fire kingdom took shape. It was not yet the structured monarchy seen in modern U. It was a network of volcanic settlements connected by heat pathways and governed by loosely recognized leaders. These leaders were fierce, ambitious, and often unstable. Their rule lasted only as long as they could keep control of their power. The fire people accepted this instability because it mirrored their elemental nature. Change did not frighten them, it energized them. The earliest true fire rulers emerged when the fire people began formalizing power. These rulers were not chosen. They seized leadership through force, charisma, or sheer elemental intensity. Their rule established a recognizable hierarchy. Some encouraged conquest and expansion. Others preferred stability. Some treated their subjects with respect. Others ruled through fear. None ruled peacefully. The Fire Kingdom's early history is full of turbulence, conflict, and transformation. This turbulence created a cultural expectation that rulers must be powerful enough to withstand challenge. Weakness was not tolerated. Leaders who faltered faced immediate rebellion. This expectation shaped the Fire Kingdom's political structure for generations. By the time the Fire Kingdom began to resemble a true monarchy, this expectation was deeply ingrained. A ruler was not only a political figure, but a symbol of fire's natural intensity. Their personal power reflected the strength of the kingdom itself. These early rulers also shaped the kingdom's laws and customs. Fire citizens were expected to control their flames in public spaces. Displays of power were permitted only in specific areas to prevent environmental collapse. Alliances with other elemental regions were rare. Fire's volatile nature made diplomacy difficult, but the early rulers recognized that total isolation would weaken the kingdom. The Fire Kingdom maintained cautious contact with other elemental societies, though trust was minimal. As the world shifted through eras of magic, mutation, and elemental cycles, the Fire Kingdom continued to grow. Its volcanic architecture expanded, its citizens multiplied, its rulers refined their governance. The kingdom solidified into a recognizable entity with traditions, political expectations, and cultural values. Fire was no longer a primal force driven solely by instinct. It had become a nation shaped by history, conflict, and elemental identity. This long evolution explains why the Fire Kingdom became one of the most powerful and feared political entities in U. Its history is rooted in survival through change, leadership through strength, and identity through elemental passion. Every ruler who followed inherited not only the throne, but also centuries of elemental expectation. The Fire Kingdom did not evolve through peace. It evolved through cycles of destruction and renewal. By the time the Flame King eventually rose to power in later eras, he inherited a kingdom built on these values. He inherited a culture that valued intensity, feared weakness, and expected rulers to maintain absolute control. The kingdom he ruled was built on the foundation created by ancient fire beings, shaped by early leaders who seized power through force, and refined by generations of fire citizens who embraced volatility as a natural part of life. The rise of the Fire Kingdom, therefore, is not a story about a single leader or a single political shift. It is the story of an elemental identity transforming into a civilization. It is a story that begins before memory, before magic settled into stable forms, before mortals understood the world as a network of kingdoms and cultures. It is a story rooted in the nature of fire itself. The Fire Kingdom rose because fire cannot remain formless forever. It changes, condenses, and finds structure even in its volatility. The kingdom began as an instinct, grew into a community, evolved into a civilization, and eventually solidified into the monarchy that would shape some of the greatest conflicts in U's history. Understanding this rise is essential for understanding the collapse that will eventually follow. For fire, creation, and destruction are never separate concepts. They are cycles. The Fire Kingdom's rise laid the foundation for its fall, and its fall would one day make room for something new. The Fire Kingdom did not become a monarchy overnight. Its earliest rulers emerged from a long chain of powerful fire beings who rose and fell through cycles of conflict, survival, and elemental intensity. These rulers existed long before the Flame King, long before modern fire citizens lived in structured cities, and long before U itself had settled into its recognizable geography. To understand how the Fire Kingdom eventually became a stable political force, one must travel back to the era of the first fire monarchs, the leaders who bridged the gap between primal elemental societies and organized civilization. This era began at the moment when fire people transitioned from instinct-driven clusters into communities with shared purpose. They no longer moved endlessly between volcanic regions. They built permanent homes within magma chambers. They carved tunnels through hardened stone to form roads. They shaped their surroundings intentionally rather than letting natural eruptions dictate their fate. This stability allowed certain fire beings to rise above the rest. These individuals possessed greater control over their flames, greater physical or magical power, and a natural capacity to influence others. They became the first figures recognized as monarchs, even if their rule lacked the structure seen in later centuries. The first of these monarchs emerged at a time when fire culture centered around survival. Territory was contested constantly. Lava pools shifted unpredictably, forcing communities to adjust their homes. Eruptions could destroy entire districts overnight. In this volatile environment, a ruler needed more than authority. They needed the strength to withstand disaster and guide their people through elemental upheaval. The earliest monarchs did not wear crowns or build palaces. They earned loyalty by demonstrating mastery over fire itself. Their ability to calm volcanic surges, redirect magma flows, and regulate the temperature of entire regions made them essential. Their rule began through survival, not ceremony. As these monarchs grew in influence, the Fire Kingdom began to take shape. Instead of scattered settlements, fire citizens gathered around central volcanic structures maintained by their rulers. These structures became early prototypes of royal halls. After years of refinement, they transformed into the towering flame-bordered chambers recognized in modern U. This development marked a critical shift in fire society. For the first time, the Fire Kingdom existed not only as a collection of clans, but as a unified people. The first fire monarchs also laid the groundwork for the kingdom's political culture. They established expectations for leadership based on personal strength, elemental control, and decisiveness. A ruler who hesitated faced immediate challenge. One who lacked enough fire essence to defend the throne rarely kept it for long. These expectations shaped the Fire Kingdom's future. Even rulers who preferred diplomacy had to demonstrate enough power to deter rebellion. Fire citizens respected strength because their elemental identity valued intensity and transformation. A weak monarch threatened the kingdom's stability, not because citizens desired conflict, but because they believed fire must be led by someone whose flames could withstand any threat. This expectation created a culture where challenges to the throne became common. A fire citizen who believed themselves stronger had the right to challenge the ruling monarch. These challenges rarely resulted in execution. Fire is not inherently cruel. Instead, many challenges ended when the weaker opponent yielded, or when the reigning monarch demonstrated superiority. This system kept rulers alert and ensured that those in power commanded genuine respect. It also created an environment where ambitious fire beings continuously refined their abilities, sharpening their control over flame, heat, and elemental magic. During this era, fire citizens also began developing their identity through craft and culture. They created armor made from hardened magma, weapons forged in smoldering pits, and clothing woven from flame-resistant fibers. These innovations reflected fire's elemental qualities. Their armor protected them from extreme heat, allowing them to live comfortably in regions that outsiders found impossible to survive. Their weapons carried intense flame energy, capable of melting through stone. Their clothing glowed with embers, giving fire society its distinctive appearance. The first fire monarchs oversaw these developments. They encouraged the creation of armor and weapons as a means of strengthening the kingdom. They supported artists who shaped molten glass into intricate pieces that hardened into glowing sculptures. These artistic expressions revealed a side of fire society often overlooked. Beneath their intensity existed a deep appreciation for beauty and creativity. These creations also reflected the elemental nature of their culture. Fire consumes, but it also illuminates. It destroys, but it also inspires creation. During this period, fire people began establishing laws. These laws did not resemble the detailed legal codes later created under structured monarchs. Instead, they focused on essential rules that ensured survival and community harmony. Fire citizens were expected to control their flames around children and elders. They were expected to avoid unnecessary destruction of shared lava pools. They were expected to assist others during volcanic emergencies. Violation of these rules resulted in punishment determined by the ruling monarch. Punishments often involved tasks like repairing damage or managing dangerous magma flows. These consequences reinforced responsibility rather than fear. One of the most important aspects of early fire society was its relationship with other elemental regions. Fire did not interact peacefully with ice. These elements existed in natural opposition. Early fire rulers viewed ice beings with suspicion. Ice responded with equal caution. Skirmishes occurred occasionally, not due to malicious intent, but because the presence of one element could destabilize the other. Candy and slime, however, had more neutral relationships with fire. Candy beings melted easily, but fire respected their organizational strengths. Slime beings adapted well to heat by changing form. These interactions established the groundwork for future alliances and conflicts. As Fire Society stabilized, the Fire Kingdom solidified into a recognizable entity. Its boundaries expanded. Its internal structure grew more organized. Its monarchs gained influence. Fire citizens constructed towers, reinforced with basalt and controlled magma streams that flowed through the kingdom like rivers. These streams acted as both energy sources and symbolic pathways connecting different districts. Magma transportation systems developed, allowing citizens to travel smoothly across the kingdom. All these systems emerged through centuries of effort, shaped by the first Fire Monarch's leadership. Across these centuries, several influential monarchs stood out. Some guided the kingdom through periods of volcanic instability. Others expanded territory by stabilizing new lava zones. Still others focused on internal development, creating new laws, traditions, and social structures. Each ruler left a lasting mark. Their contributions gradually transformed Fire Society from a volatile cluster of elemental beings into a thriving political force. Their leadership demonstrated that fire, though chaotic by nature, could build a stable culture through shared identity and collective effort. An important cultural development emerged during this era. Fire citizens began passing down elemental techniques through families and training groups. These techniques included advanced flame control, heat shaping, and resistance strengthening. Citizens learned to modify their flames for specific tasks. Some became skilled at precise temperature changes. Others mastered combat techniques. Others specialized in constructing heat-resistant structures. These skills shaped daily life and contributed to the Fire Kingdom's growing sophistication. During this era, the kingdom also experienced its first major collapse. A series of volcanic eruptions, combined with a particularly unstable monarch, led to widespread destruction. Entire districts fell into molten pits, infrastructure crumbled, citizens scattered. This collapse taught the kingdom an important lesson. Fire's nature allowed destruction to precede renewal. After the devastation, new leaders emerged, rebuilding the kingdom stronger than before. This cycle of collapse and renewal became a defining pattern throughout Fire history. The kingdom never feared collapse, because collapse always led to transformation. As the centuries continued, the Fire Kingdom entered a golden age under a ruler whose strength and leadership unified the kingdom more fully than ever before. This monarch established the foundation for the modern Fire monarchy with clear systems of succession. They formalized the concept of the royal family. They created schools for elemental training. They established traditions that celebrated fire's intensity through festivals and rituals. Many of these traditions survived into the modern era, including celebrations of volcanic renewal, flame-shaping contests, and recognition ceremonies for citizens who protected the kingdom during natural disasters. The Golden Age also saw increased interaction with the outside world. Fire diplomats visited neighboring regions, negotiating trade of lava, forged metal, and heat-resistant materials. The kingdom's unique resources became highly valued. In return, Fire received goods that supported internal development. These exchanges strengthened political ties, reduced unnecessary conflict, and diversified the Fire Kingdom's identity By the end of the era of the first fire monarchs, the Fire Kingdom had completed its transformation from an elemental force into a structured civilization. It possessed stable leadership, established traditions, recognized social roles, and a clear identity. This transformation prepared the kingdom for later eras, including the eventual reign of the Flame King, the turmoil of the modern monarchy, and the collapse brought by elemental imbalance. The Fire Kingdom's rise is inseparable from its earliest rulers. They shaped a nation that reflected both the volatility and resilience of fire. They guided their people through disaster and renewal. They built a kingdom that embraced intensity while learning to control it. Their legacy continued through the successors who inherited the throne, carrying forward a culture forged in flame and strengthened through centuries of change. This chapter lays the groundwork for understanding the Fire Kingdom's later history. Without the first fire monarchs, the kingdom would never have developed the identity that defined its political and emotional landscape. Their era gives context to the rise of the Flame King and the dramatic shifts that would eventually lead to the collapse of the kingdom as U knew it. By the time the Fire Kingdom entered its next major era, the foundations laid by the first fire monarchs had already transformed the elemental landscape. What began as scattered volcanic clans had become a society capable of structured growth, cultural evolution, and organized leadership. Still, the Fire Kingdom was far from the thriving political power it would one day become. Its early centuries as a true kingdom were defined by constant rebuilding, experiments in governance, territorial expansion, and the struggle to control an element that resisted all forms of stability. Understanding this era requires recognizing a fundamental truth about fire. Unlike other elements, fire does not naturally remain still. Ice endures, candy seeks order, slime adapts, but fire transforms endlessly. Even when fire constructs something solid, the heat beneath it continues to shift. This instability influenced every part of the Fire Kingdom's early development, from architecture to politics to interpersonal relationships. The first true kings and queens of this period did not view stability as a goal. They viewed it as a momentary advantage that could be reshaped at any time. Fire monarchs approached leadership with an acceptance that everything they built could collapse, melt, or transform within a single generation. Instead of resisting this volatility, they used it as a creative force. They built structures that allowed change rather than fought against it. They shaped magma channels that could be rerouted when necessary. They constructed buildings designed to melt partially during heat surges so they could cool into new forms. This approach turned the Fire Kingdom into one of the most visually distinct places in U. Buildings flickered with shifting colours. Towers leaned, then straightened as magma cooled. Bridges of glowing basalt shifted thickness depending on the surrounding temperature. Citizens moved through environments that felt alive because the kingdom itself was a living entity shaped by elemental heat. During this era, the Fire Kingdom developed its signature architecture. Tall, curved towers, formed from volcanic rock, spiraled upward like frozen flames. Windows glowed with internal heat. Walls radiated warmth so intense that most visitors from other realms could not withstand them without protective gear. These structures reflected fire's dual nature, destructive when uncontrolled, but beautiful when shaped intentionally. Every building stood as a testament to the kingdom's refusal to separate art from environment. Fire could destroy, but it could also create structures unmatched in their luminous complexity. As fire citizens continued developing their skills, a specialized class emerged. These individuals became known as flame shapers. They possessed exceptional control over their elemental energy and could manipulate fire with precision. Flame shapers influenced architecture, engineering, and the kingdom's aesthetic identity. They shaped magma into pillars, moulded fire into controlled patterns, and worked alongside monarchs to strengthen structural foundations. Their work granted the kingdom a level of sophistication it had never seen before. Because of them, the Fire Kingdom gained the stability needed to grow politically. Monarchs relied on flame shapers to maintain structures essential to governance, such as council halls and administrative centres. These halls became places where early fire councils debated laws, discussed territorial disputes, and planned national festivals. Although fire culture valued strength, it soon recognised the importance of organised leadership. Councils helped stabilise transitions of power, reducing unnecessary chaos and encouraging cooperation between fire districts. During this period, the Fire Kingdom also established a royal lineage for the first time. Earlier, eras had no concept of hereditary succession. A ruler simply remained in power until challenged. Now, monarchs began passing the throne to chosen family members or prepared protégés. The introduction of lineage gave the kingdom a sense of continuity. Citizens could anticipate changes in leadership and prepare for them rather than being surprised by sudden upheavals. This lineage system did not prevent challenges entirely, but it redefined them. Challenges became ceremonial, structured events overseen by high-ranking flame shapers to ensure fairness. A challenger would face the monarch under controlled conditions. If the monarch defeated the challenger, their authority was reaffirmed. If the challenger won, the transfer of power became official. This tradition preserved fire culture's value of strength while preventing the kingdom from descending into constant instability. The Fire Kingdom also developed its social structure during this era. Fire citizens were categorized by skill rather than wealth or birth. Some became heat regulators, responsible for stabilizing magma flows across the kingdom. Others became combat instructors, teaching citizens how to defend themselves during volcanic emergencies. Still others became artisans, crafting glowing pottery, molten sculptures, and intricate glasswork that reflected the kingdom's fiery essence. Every role served the kingdom's well-being. Fire society valued contribution more than hierarchy. The kingdom also developed public spaces that encouraged community. Lava gardens glowed with rhythmic bursts of heat. Molten fountains provided warmth and illumination. Communal gathering pits hosted celebrations where citizens displayed flame dances that expressed their identity through movement. These celebrations reinforced unity and reminded citizens that fire was not only destructive, but communal, expressive, and artistic. Although the Fire Kingdom solidified internally, its external relationships remained complex. Fire's volatile nature made diplomacy difficult. The Ice Kingdom continued viewing fire as a natural threat, and fire saw ice as equally dangerous. Their interactions were brief, cautious, and often unproductive. However, fire maintained peaceful relationships with Candy and Slime. Candy's order balanced fire's unpredictability, and Slime's adaptability allowed comfortable interaction even in heated environments. These relationships helped fire trade essential resources, including hardened magma tools and heat-resistant materials valued by other kingdoms. During this era, fire scholars began studying the elemental cycles that shaped U. They discovered that the Flame Princess inherited elemental essence tied to all fire monarchs. These scholars theorized that the kingdom's rulers were not merely political leaders, but manifestations of fire's core identity. This discovery influenced how monarchs governed. They felt a responsibility not only to their people, but to fire itself. Their role expanded from leadership to guardianship. The monarch became the living symbol of the element. This shift in identity increased respect for the throne and strengthened the royal lineage. This period saw several important monarchs, each contributing to the kingdom's development. Some expanded territory by stabilizing distant volcanic regions. Others built new districts for artisans and flame shapers. Some strengthened diplomatic ties. Others focused on internal peace. Together, they created a fire kingdom that no longer resembled its chaotic origins. The kingdom became a place of culture, power, industry, and identity rooted in elemental heritage. Still, the seeds of future collapse were already present. Fire's nature, though controlled, remained volatile. Many monarchs struggled to maintain balance between strength and restraint. Some grew overly aggressive, believing expansion was necessary to honor fire's instinct for transformation. Others attempted to impose strict control, diminishing fire's natural freedom and causing unrest among citizens. These extremes revealed a core truth. A fire ruler needed balance. Too much intensity threatened stability. Too much control suppressed fire's essence. Generations of monarchs tried to navigate this delicate balance. Some succeeded, others failed. The kingdom endured because fire always rebuilt what fire destroyed. However, the old patterns of rise and collapse persisted. Even the most stable monarchs faced challenges from ambitious fire beings eager to reshape the kingdom. These cycles continued until the era that preceded the Flame King. By then, the Fire Kingdom had grown into a formidable realm. Its internal culture was sophisticated, its architecture defined by glowing structures, its political traditions deeply ingrained, its identity fully formed. Yet behind the beauty of its magma channels lay the reminder that fire, no matter how carefully shaped, could erupt without warning. The kingdom's rise had reached its peak. Its collapse would follow. This collapse would not occur immediately. Many eras still stood between this period and the modern Fire Kingdom. However, the patterns that would eventually shape its downfall had already begun. The next era, the rise of the Flame King, would reveal the limits of fire monarchy and the cost of ruling, an element that resists control. The kingdom's traditions, strengths, and vulnerabilities would converge in ways that shaped the future of U. The Fire Kingdom had risen through centuries of transformation. Soon, that same elemental nature would test its ability to survive. As centuries passed, and the Fire Kingdom solidified into a structured civilization, one royal lineage gradually emerged as the dominant bloodline within the monarchy. This family, later known in scholarly texts as the line of Emberblood, produced a sequence of rulers whose elemental strength, political instincts, and cultural influence shaped the Fire Kingdom for generations. The Flame King, whose reign would eventually lead to the collapse of the Old Order, descended from this lineage. To understand his rise, one must trace the history of the Emberblood family and the forces that shaped their rule. The origins of this lineage are obscure. Fire records from the earliest eras remain incomplete due to the destructive nature of fire's environment. Many documents burned, melted, or fused together into glowing slabs of unreadable magma. Still, fragments survive through oral traditions, lava inscriptions, and flame-shaped murals etched into volcanic rock. These fragments describe a powerful monarch who emerged during the kingdom's early golden age, a ruler who possessed exceptional flame stability and mastery over elemental heat. Scholars believe this individual was the first true Emberblood monarch, forging a legacy that would influence every generation that followed. What distinguished the Emberbloods from earlier monarchs was their unique combination of strength and control. Earlier rulers often struggled to balance fire's volatility with the need for governance. They could command power, but they lacked the patience to cultivate long-term stability. The Emberbloods, however, understood that fire must be guided carefully. They embraced fiery intensity, but also valued discipline, strategy, and foresight. This dual mindset allowed them to expand the kingdom's influence while maintaining internal harmony. Citizens admired them for this balance, and rival clans yielded to their authority. This lineage also developed a philosophy of rulership that shaped the kingdom's culture. They believed the monarch was not only the leader of the fire people, but a living embodiment of the elemental essence of fire itself. The monarch's personal flame symbolized the strength of the kingdom. Their temperament influenced the mood of citizens. Their decisions shaped the flow of magma channels, the traditions of the courts, and the direction of national festivals. This spiritual approach elevated the monarchy to a revered position. Fire citizens viewed their rulers as both political leaders and elemental anchors. The Emberblood line produced several influential rulers before the Flame King. One expanded the kingdom's territory by stabilizing distant lava fields that had long been too volatile for settlement. Another established a system of elemental education that trained young fire citizens in flame control, ensuring that every generation possessed essential survival skills. Another reorganized the council structure, giving artisans, flame, shapers, and scholars a stronger voice in governance. These reforms strengthened the kingdom and protected it from internal fractures. Yet even as the Emberbloods refined the kingdom's systems, the seeds of future instability quietly grew. Fire's nature encourages intensity. Successive monarchs were expected to outshine their predecessors, surpass their achievements, and wield greater control over elemental power. This expectation placed immense pressure on each new ruler. Those who could not meet the standards faced internal dissent or external challenge. Even the most stable monarchs dealt with the constant weight of fire's demanding identity. As the Emberblood line approached its later generations, internal tensions began to rise. Different branches of the family developed competing philosophies. Some believed fire should dominate other elemental regions through strength. Others believed the kingdom should prioritize stability and avoid needless conflict. These ideological differences created fractures that the monarchy worked tirelessly to conceal. Although the kingdom appeared unified from the outside, political currents beneath the surface grew increasingly turbulent. During this turbulent period, the Fire Kingdom faced several natural disasters that tested its leadership. A massive volcanic surge destroyed several districts. Lava storms swept through the outer regions. These events forced the Emberblood monarchs to focus their energy on rebuilding rather than expansion. Their attention shifted inward, creating a period of introspection that highlighted the kingdom's strengths and weaknesses. Citizens remained loyal, but many began questioning whether the royal family's focus should shift toward modernization rather than maintaining old traditions. This growing tension reached a turning point when a charismatic prince from the Emberblood line rose to prominence. His name was not preserved in surviving records, but his influence shaped the kingdom's future. He advocated for aggressive expansion, claiming fire's nature demanded continued transformation and outward growth. He believed the kingdom had grown stagnant and needed to reassert its elemental identity. His ideas appealed to younger fire citizens who felt limited by restrictive laws and ceremonial expectations. However, the ruling monarch at the time disagreed. They supported stability and diplomacy, believing expansion would provoke conflict with neighbouring realms. This disagreement created a rift within the royal family. The prince eventually left the capital, gathering supporters in distant volcanic regions. Though he never successfully challenged the ruling monarch, his movement fractured the kingdom's unity. His followers carried his philosophy through future generations, creating a lineage of fire citizens who believed force and ambition were necessary for fire's survival. Generations later, this branch of the Emberblood family produced a ruler who would reign with a volatile mixture of charisma and authoritarian strength. This individual, known among historians as the Great Ignis, became one of the most influential monarchs in the kingdom's history. His reign marked a resurgence of fire's intensity. He restructured the royal guard, expanded the kingdom's borders, and revived ancient combat rituals that emphasized personal strength. Citizens admired him for his passion and determination. He believed fire's identity required constant testing, and he encouraged displays of elemental prowess across the kingdom. Under Great Ignis, the Fire Kingdom prospered briefly. New districts were built. Magma channels were widened. The palace expanded into the towering structure recognized in modern U. However, his aggressive leadership created hidden fractures. His emphasis on strength alienated citizens who valued stability. His strict rule suppressed dissent. The kingdom became powerful, but it grew rigid. Fire, by nature, resists rigidity. It thrives when allowed to change. Over time, the Great Ignis's inflexible rule created pressure that would later contribute to the kingdom's downfall. After the reign of Great Ignis ended, the Emberblood line entered a period of decline. Successive monarchs struggled to maintain the balance he disrupted. Some attempted to imitate his strength, but they lacked his charisma. Others tried to restore the old stability, but the kingdom had changed too greatly. Citizens were divided. Some longed for the structured power of Ignis's reign. Others sought a return to the kingdom's earlier flexibility. The monarchy found itself caught between competing expectations. This instability lasted for generations. Eventually, the Fire Kingdom reached a point where its traditions became brittle. The Emberblood lineage had grown complex. Some branches advocated aggression. Others advocated restraint. Succession disputes became common. Personal ambition overshadowed communal identity. Fire's inherent volatility resurfaced with renewed intensity, but without the creative direction that earlier monarchs had provided. The kingdom's foundations trembled beneath the weight of conflicting philosophies. It is within this atmosphere that the Flame King's predecessor ruled. This ruler inherited a fractured kingdom. They attempted to unite the family lines, but their efforts were limited. Internal pressure continued to build. Factions fought for influence behind palace walls. Citizens became restless. The kingdom's traditions became points of contention. The monarchy struggled to retain its legitimacy. Fire, once shaped into a stable civilization, felt ready to erupt. Then came the rise of the monarch, who would one day be known simply as the Flame King. He descended from the more aggressive branch of the Emberblood line, carrying forward the philosophy that fire should dominate through intensity. He inherited the charm and ambition that defined that branch. His personal flame was powerful, his presence commanding, and his influence immediate. For fire citizens who felt the kingdom had grown stagnant, his arrival seemed like a return to greatness. His coronation marked a new era for the Fire Kingdom. Citizens celebrated, believing he would restore fire's identity. Advisors praised his strength. Guard captains admired his authority. He brought clarity to a kingdom lost between opposing philosophies. For a time, his rule appeared successful. The kingdom regained confidence. The palace regained order. Factions united beneath his flame. Yet beneath this stability lay an emerging darkness. The Flame King's philosophy, inherited from the aggressive branch of his lineage, placed power above compassion. He viewed fire's nature as justification for control rather than responsibility. His authoritarian tendencies grew. His distrust of rivals deepened. He began implementing harsh policies designed to preempt dissent. The kingdom felt orderly, but the freedom that fire citizens cherished began to shrink. The volatility that once shaped fire's creativity became suppressed. Pressure built beneath the surface. The Fire Kingdom was entering a period of decline. Although citizens did not see it immediately, the kingdom was slowly collapsing beneath rigid structure imposed on an element that resisted confinement. Fire could not remain contained without consequence. The Flame King's reign, though powerful, carried within it the seeds of destruction. This chapter sets the stage for understanding how the Flame King inherited a kingdom already strained by centuries of internal conflict. His rise was part of a larger pattern, and his downfall would follow that same cycle, leading to the collapse and rebirth of the Fire Kingdom through his daughter, the Flame Princess. When the Flame King took the throne, the Fire Kingdom found itself standing at a crossroads shaped by centuries of pressure. The old Emberblood traditions were fractured. The kingdom's political identity was divided between those who sought stability and those who believed fire must always push outward through ambition. These tensions created an atmosphere where a strong ruler could rise quickly, but also where any instability at the top could cause the entire kingdom to fracture. Into this volatile environment stepped the Flame King, a monarch whose reign would become the final spark that ignited the collapse of the old Fire Kingdom. Understanding the Flame King requires recognizing the lineage and culture that shaped him. He descended from the more intense and aggressive branch of the Emberblood family, a branch that valued power, dominance, and dramatic displays of strength. From birth, he was raised to believe that fire should never be gentle. He was taught that hesitation weakened flame, and that the kingdom needed a ruler who embodied the raw essence of fire. These teachings shaped his personality, but they also planted the seeds of the authoritarian rule he would later impose on his people. The Flame King's natural fire was exceptionally strong. Fire citizens measure a monarch's worth through both intensity and control. A ruler with weak flames cannot gain respect. A ruler with powerful flames but poor discipline cannot maintain stability. The Flame King excelled in both. His flames burned with deep orange and gold hues associated with ancient fire lineages. His heat radiated through the palace and influenced entire magma channels. Advisors and guards alike felt his presence before he even entered a room. During the early days of his reign, he used this presence strategically. He projected confidence and intensity. Citizens admired his energy, seeing in him a return to the strength that once defined historic monarchs. They wanted a leader who could protect them during volcanic crises and restore fire's proud identity. For a brief moment, his rule appeared promising. He reorganized neglected districts, repaired damaged magma pathways, and delivered passionate declarations about fire unity. These gestures won him early support. However, beneath this charismatic exterior lay a desire for total control. Fire, by nature, moves freely and unpredictably. The Flame King viewed this freedom as weakness. He wanted order, not flexibility. He wanted obedience, not debate. He believed the Fire Kingdom had declined because its rulers had grown soft. He saw the lingering influence of the stable branch of the Emberblood family as a threat and considered their philosophies dangerous to fire's natural dominance. These beliefs shaped the policies he soon imposed across the kingdom. His first major act as king was to restructure the royal guard. Earlier monarchs had relied on a combination of elite soldiers and flame shapers to maintain peace. The Flame King dismissed many seasoned guards, replacing them with individuals loyal to him alone. These new guards viewed him not only as their sovereign, but as a figure of near elemental destiny. Their devotion allowed him to enforce policies without resistance from within his own palace. Next, he altered the council structure. For centuries, fire citizens from various professions held seats in advisory councils. Scholars, artisans, flame shapers, and heat regulators all contributed perspectives that helped the kingdom maintain balance. The Flame King dismissed most of them, retaining only those aligned with his vision. Soon, the council became an echo chamber that strengthened his authority rather than challenging it. Without opposing voices, the king's policies grew harsher, more controlling, and more disconnected from the needs of the kingdom. One of the most impactful changes the Flame King made concerned family succession. Earlier monarchs viewed their children as potential heirs, but the Flame King took this concept further. He believed his own lineage must become the uncontested source of fire monarchy. To ensure this, he imposed strict rules that prioritized his bloodline above all others. This philosophy would later influence how he raised his daughter, the future Flame Princess, and became a critical cause of the kingdom's collapse. During this era, fire citizens noticed a gradual shift in the kingdom's atmosphere. The joyful festivals that once celebrated fire's creative energy became more militaristic. Elegance gave way to spectacle. The Flame King preferred parades of power, with guards demonstrating combat skills and citizens displaying intense bursts of flame. The emphasis on strength overshadowed the artistic and communal traditions that once unified fire society. At the same time, citizens felt growing pressure to conform. Fire is an element that thrives on individuality. Every fire citizen's flame burns differently. Some flicker with bright yellows. Others pulse with deep cinders. The Flame King viewed these differences as distractions. He encouraged uniform displays and discouraged artistic expression that deviated from his ideals. This cultural suppression stifled creativity and eroded the kingdom's identity. One of the most troubling aspects of his rule was his approach to parenting. The Flame King believed his successor needed to embody absolute power. When he discovered his newborn daughter possessed extraordinary fire essence, he saw her as the perfect heir. However, he viewed her not as a child, but as an elemental asset. His obsession with shaping her into a weapon led him to isolate her from the kingdom. He feared others might influence her or destabilize her intense energy. This decision reflected a misunderstanding of fire's true nature. Fire thrives when allowed to grow freely. Suppression creates instability. The Flame King's decision to imprison his daughter in a lantern-like chamber deep within the palace was one of the most defining choices of his reign. Although he justified it as a protective measure, the act isolated her from experiences that would later prove essential to her growth. Citizens did not know she existed. Advisors were forbidden from questioning his decision. This secrecy created tension in the palace, and some fire scholars recognized the danger of suppressing an elemental heir. However, their concerns were dismissed, and many were forced into silence. The king's control extended beyond his daughter. He implemented laws that monitored citizens more closely. Patrols increased. Spontaneous use of flame techniques became regulated. Even gatherings required approval. This suppression weakened fire's creative spirit. The kingdom grew more rigid, more fearful, and less resilient. Fire citizens who once celebrated their individuality felt constrained, and some began whispering about the need for change. As internal tension grew, external relations deteriorated. The Flame King's aggressive stance toward other kingdoms created political hostility. The Ice Kingdom responded defensively. Candy diplomats avoided fire entirely. Even slime, usually neutral, became wary. These strained relations weakened trade and limited the Fire Kingdom's access to crucial resources. The Flame King interpreted this isolation as a sign of fear from other realms, reinforcing his belief that his dominance was necessary. The kingdom's internal infrastructure began showing signs of stress. Magma channels clogged due to lack of maintenance. Flame shapers, once celebrated, found their roles diminished. Without their guidance, temperature fluctuations became unpredictable. Citizens struggled to adapt. Some districts suffered heat surges that damaged homes. Others experienced cooling phases that disrupted elemental balance. These issues, once prevented by cooperative governance, now went unresolved under authoritarian rule. As the Flame King tightened his grip, he lost sight of fire's inherent nature. Fire cannot be constrained without consequence. It is an element that must breathe. It must transform. It must be allowed to express itself. By suppressing creativity, isolating his heir, and eliminating diverse voices from his council, the Flame King disrupted the kingdom's equilibrium. Beneath the polished facade of authority, instability grew. The first signs of collapse appeared in the behavior of fire citizens. Flame suppression led to emotional distress. Citizens who once expressed themselves through spontaneous flame dances or artistic displays now felt trapped. Some attempted to leave the kingdom. Others formed underground groups dedicated to preserving old traditions. These groups did not initially seek rebellion. They simply desired to restore fire's cultural identity. Their gatherings reflected fire's natural cycle of renewal, which had been stifled by the king's rigid control. The Flame King viewed these groups as threats. His paranoia intensified. He ordered guards to monitor suspected gatherings, further straining the kingdom's trust. Fear replaced unity. Citizens who once felt pride in their identity now felt suffocated by it. The king's efforts to maintain order only increased resistance. Fire, pushed into containment, began seeking escape routes. The breaking point arrived when the king attempted to suppress a small group of flame shapers who continued practicing old artistic traditions. Their work, although harmless, represented values the king considered dangerous. When he punished them publicly, citizens witnessed a side of his rule that could no longer be justified. A wave of unrest spread across the kingdom. Citizens whispered about the need for change. Some called for the restoration of earlier Emberblood values. Others believed a new era needed to begin altogether. This unrest did not immediately topple the Flame King. His power remained strong. However, the kingdom had reached a fragile state. Every decision he made generated new fractures. Every attempt to strengthen his rule created new enemies. The old Fire Kingdom was entering its final stage. The intense pressure created by the Flame King's misrule would eventually lead to the rise of Flame Princess, whose destiny would transform the kingdom in ways no one expected. The tyranny of the Flame King is remembered not only for its cruelty, but for its misunderstanding of fire's essence. He saw fire as a tool of control rather than a symbol of freedom. He tried to cage an element that thrives through transformation. His rule created the perfect conditions for collapse, ensuring that when change came, it would be irreversible. The Fire Kingdom stood on the edge of destruction. Soon, its flames would be reshaped by rebellion, transformation, and the rise of a new ruler whose power would alter the elemental balance of U itself. Long before the Fire Kingdom collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, a quiet secret lay hidden deep within the palace. In a chamber wrapped in volcanic stone and illuminated only by the glow of her own flames, the future ruler of the Fire Kingdom lived in forced solitude. This child, who would one day transform her nation, knew nothing of the throne, nothing of the expectations placed on her, and nothing of the political tension simmering just beyond the walls of her prison. She was simply a girl made of fire, full of untamed energy and potential, kept isolated by a king who believed her power was too dangerous to be allowed freedom. Her early life defined the future of the Fire Kingdom. The Flame King believed he was shaping a weapon, but what he truly created was the catalyst for the kingdom's collapse. Understanding her childhood is essential to understanding how the Fire Kingdom fell and why it later rose again under her leadership. The decision to imprison her was rooted in the Flame King's belief that her elemental energy was too powerful to control. When she was still an infant, her fire burned with a strength that surpassed previous heirs. Fire citizens believed she was a sign of renewal, a being who could restore the ember of the kingdom's spirit. The king interpreted her power differently. He saw danger, threat, and potential rebellion. He feared she would undermine his authority or attract the admiration of those who opposed his rule. Instead of guidance, he chose containment. Her earliest memories formed within a chamber built to suppress her influence. The chamber was a round enclosure designed to trap heat and prevent energy from escaping. Its walls absorbed flame, limiting her ability to interact with her environment. She lived without windows, without open space, without other fire children to play with. Her flame grew and shrank with her emotions, reflecting the isolation she experienced. The chamber reflected none of the pride, vibrant culture of the Fire Kingdom. It was an empty room, with a single occupant whose future had been sealed the moment she was born. In this chamber, she learned to control her flames without guidance. Fire children normally grew up surrounded by family, mentors, and community members who taught them to regulate their heat and express their emotions safely. Because the Flame Princess had no such guidance, her relationship with her power developed differently. Her flames responded directly to her emotional state. When she felt lonely, her fire dimmed. When she felt frustrated, her flames brightened. When she felt angry, the chamber shook with her energy. Her power grew without structure, reflecting the instability created by her isolation. Despite the restrictions, she developed a vivid inner world. Fire children are naturally expressive. They move in rhythmic patterns, hum with heat, and create spontaneous bursts of flame art. With no one to witness these expressions, the Flame Princess created her own rituals. She shaped tiny sparks into floating patterns, arranged embers into glowing trails, and watched her flame shadows dance across the walls. These acts were not merely creative outlets. They helped her understand herself. Unable to interact with others, she discovered her identity through the behaviors of her own flame. The king rarely visited her. His presence filled the chamber with thick, oppressive heat. To her young mind, he was a distant figure of fear and awe. He brought no comfort. His visits were not nurturing, but evaluative, as if he viewed her as an experiment rather than a child. He sometimes tested her abilities, provoking emotional reactions to measure her power. These encounters left her confused and uneasy. She longed for connection, but received none. The king saw emotional bonds as weaknesses. He believed affection would soften her flame and compromise her destiny as a ruler. Her few interactions came from guards who delivered food, checked the stability of her chamber. These meetings were brief and monitored. Guards were instructed not to speak to her. Still, some offered small kindnesses. A guard might leave a glowing pebble shaped into a heart. Another might pause for a moment longer than necessary, acknowledging her presence with a sympathetic glance. These subtle gestures were the closest thing she had to friendship. They showed her that fire citizens outside the chamber recognized her isolation and felt compassion. More than anything, her childhood was shaped by longing. She sensed the world beyond her chamber in subtle ways. Vibrations in the stone suggested movement outside. Temperature changes hinted at the daily activities of fire citizens. Faint echoes of ritual songs during festivals reached her when guards forgot to seal the chamber completely. She felt the world shifting around her, but could not touch it. This longing became the emotional foundation of her future choices. Fire thrives on connection. Isolated flame flickers in instability. Her desire to connect would later shape her leadership style and her transformation of fire culture. As she grew older, her awareness of injustice deepened. She began questioning why she was isolated. The chamber had no answers. Her only understanding came from observing her own flames, which flared in confusion when she searched for meaning. She did not yet know she was an heir. She did not know she was dangerous. She did not know her father feared her potential. She only knew she was lonely, confined, and desperate for freedom. Her emotional development took place without external influence. She lacked the guidance that fire children rely on. As a result, her anger sometimes surged uncontrollably. She lacked the strategies to calm herself. When her emotions peaked, the chamber glowed bright enough to alarm guards outside. They feared these outbursts, but were forbidden from comforting her. The king viewed her emotional volatility as a sign of strength, unaware that it stemmed from deprivation rather than innate danger. At the same time, her resilience grew. Fire adapts when pushed to extremes. The Flame Princess developed internal strategies to manage her solitude. She learned to meditate by focusing on the movement of her flames. She practiced forming controlled spheres of fire to stabilize her energy. She created imaginary companions made from floating embers. These habits strengthened her inner world and gave her a sense of agency. Her resilience would later serve her well when she faced the responsibilities of leadership. Still, the consequences of her confinement extended beyond emotional instability. Without proper training, her flame powers developed unevenly. Some abilities grew immense, while others remained unrefined. She became capable of producing bursts of intense heat, but she struggled to regulate them. This imbalance would later create challenges when she attempted to integrate into society. Her difficulty controlling her power was not a natural flaw, but a direct result of her isolated upbringing. Her story would have remained hidden forever, if not for an external visitor who would significantly alter her fate. When Finn discovered her existence, he saw not a dangerous heir, but a girl trapped unfairly. His reaction triggered the beginning of her transformation. His compassion contrasted sharply with the control she had endured all her life. His willingness to connect with her opened a door she never knew existed. Although their relationship would become complicated, their meeting marked the first moment she experienced genuine connection. When she was finally freed from her chamber, the Fire Princess entered a world she had only imagined. The kingdom overwhelmed her senses. The glow of magma channels, the towering architecture, the presence of fire citizens moving freely. She absorbed everything with wonder and confusion. Her flame fluctuated wildly, reflecting her conflicting emotions. She quickly learned that the world was larger than her chamber, but she also discovered that she lacked the social experience needed to navigate it. Her introduction to the kingdom was not smooth. She struggled to understand the customs her father had suppressed. She encountered citizens who viewed her with admiration, fear, or uncertainty. Some saw her as the rightful heir, destined to restore the kingdom. Others feared her power. Her flame responded to every emotion around her, creating unpredictable surges that reflected the instability she had inherited from her confinement. Still, her first steps into society revealed her most defining trait. Despite the fear, anger, and confusion that shaped her childhood, she possessed a deep capacity for empathy. She wanted to connect. She wanted to belong. She wanted to understand her people. These desires set her apart from her father, whose rule had relied on fear and dominance. Her instinct to connect came from a lifetime of isolation. Her empathy became her strength. It would later allow her to restore the unity that the kingdom had lost under her father's rule. Her relationship with Finn contributed significantly to her development. He approached her with honesty, kindness, and curiosity. He did not treat her as a threat or a political figure. He treated her as a person. Through this connection, she learned what trust felt like. She learned that fire could coexist with other elements. She learned that emotions did not need to be suppressed but understood. Finn did not shape her destiny, but he opened her heart to possibilities she had never imagined. Her exposure to the outside world also revealed the truth about her father. She realized he viewed her as a tool rather than a daughter. This realization ignited her internal conflict. She struggled to reconcile her desire for connection with the harshness of the world her father had created. Her emotional volatility during this period reflected the clash between her inner nature and the kingdom's oppressive environment. Over time, she grew more aware of her role as heir. Fire citizens whispered about her destiny. Some saw in her the potential to restore freedom. Others feared the instability her power could bring. She felt the weight of these expectations, even before she understood them fully. Her flame fluctuated between hope and anxiety. She wanted to rise, but feared repeating her father's mistakes. Her earliest acts of independence foreshadowed the kingdom's future. She resisted her father's control. She questioned his decisions. She learned to trust her instincts. Fire citizens watched her with growing admiration. They sensed in her a different kind of flame, one shaped by compassion rather than dominance. Her presence inspired hope in those who believed the kingdom needed change. Her childhood, though filled with hardship, shaped her into a ruler capable of transforming the Fire Kingdom. The isolation that once suppressed her identity became the foundation for her empathy. Her struggles with control taught her humility. Her longing for connection shaped her leadership style. Her defiance of her father symbolized the kingdom's desire for renewal. The Flame Princess was not created through tradition, but forged through adversity. Her secret childhood planted the seeds of revolution. When she eventually claimed her place, she carried within her the hope of a kingdom ready to rise from the ashes of authoritarian rule. The Fire Kingdom had survived countless periods of transformation. It had endured volcanic collapses, unstable monarchs, elemental fluctuations, and internal disputes. Each time, fire rebuilt itself with renewed strength. This cycle of destruction and rebirth defined fire's identity. Yet under the Flame King's rule, the kingdom entered a phase unlike any it had ever experienced. The tension created by his authoritarian policies, combined with the hidden existence of the Flame Princess, produced a pressure that could not be contained indefinitely. Every spark of unrest, every whispered complaint, and every suppressed flame contributed to a growing instability that threatened to engulf the kingdom from within. Long before the Flame Princess confronted her father, the cracks in the kingdom were already widening. Citizens felt it in the air. The palace guards felt it in the king's increasingly erratic behavior. Scholars felt it in the irregular patterns of the elemental flows beneath the palace. Even the magma channels pulsed with uneven heat, as if mirroring the imbalance of the monarchy itself. The kingdom was approaching its breaking point. The Flame King believed he was maintaining order. He believed his strict policies prevented the return of the instability that plagued earlier eras. In reality, he was applying pressure to an element that resisted confinement. Fire must move. When forced into rigid forms, it erupts. The king failed to understand this fundamental truth. His reign reflected a misunderstanding of the very element he controlled. The first major sign of impending collapse occurred within the royal palace. For generations, the palace had served as a center of culture, administration, and communication. It was a place where flame shapers presented their work, where scholars debated elemental philosophy, and where citizens gathered to celebrate festivals. Under the Flame King, this openness vanished. The palace became a fortress. Guards patrolled every hall. Visitors entered only under strict supervision. The warmth that once symbolized unity shifted into an oppressive heat that discouraged free expression. The more the king tightened his control, the more palace life suffocated. Advisors who had once spoken freely became silent. Flame shapers who once created magnificent art found themselves restricted to tasks approved by the king. Scholars who studied ancient elemental history were forced to revise their theories to align with the king's narrative. The palace, once a thriving symbol of fire's complexity, now reflected the rigid values of its ruler. Citizens, outside the palace, felt the effects of these changes in subtle but significant ways. Districts experienced inconsistent heat distribution. Some areas became dangerously hot, others cooled in ways that threatened citizens' elemental stability. Previously, heat regulators would have corrected these issues swiftly. Under the king's strict rules, fewer regulators remained in their positions. Those who remained worked under constant strain, unable to meet the growing demands of a kingdom shifting out of balance. The king's efforts to preserve order created a contradiction. He believed he was stabilizing the kingdom, yet his policies destabilized the element itself. Fire does not respond well to monotony. It requires emotional expression, dynamic movement, and creative release. Without these outlets, fire energy builds dangerously. Citizens, unable to express their identity, experienced emotional strain. Some grew volatile, others became withdrawn. Their flames fluctuated unpredictably, reflecting the kingdom's growing turmoil. This emotional imbalance manifested in the younger generation most of all. Fire children, who normally learned flame control through play and creative exploration, now found themselves restricted. Lessons became rigid. Instructors enforced strict behaviors that discouraged imagination. Children began displaying unusual flame patterns, some flickering erratically, others dimming in ways that alarmed their parents. These anomalies revealed the deeper truth. Suppression harmed fire far more than it strengthened it. The second major sign of collapse occurred when a group of flame shapers attempted to preserve ancient traditions. These artisans believed the kingdom's cultural identity depended on the freedom to shape fire creatively. They gathered in secret to practice their craft, creating flame sculptures that danced across the air and molten structures that shifted in harmony with elemental rhythms. Their work was peaceful, but the king saw it as rebellion. When he discovered their gathering, he ordered the group to be punished. This punishment shook the kingdom. Fire citizens respected flame shapers. Their artistry was essential to fire culture. To see them disciplined publicly signaled a turning point. Citizens who had remained silent began questioning whether loyalty to the king aligned with loyalty to fire itself. Whispers of discontent grew louder. The king interpreted these whispers as threats, increasing his surveillance even further. This cycle of repression and resistance spiraled. The more the king sought control, the more fire citizens resisted quietly. The more citizens resisted, the more he punished. Eventually, fear replaced unity. Even loyalists sensed something was wrong. They noticed the king's paranoia. They observed the imbalance in the kingdom's energy. They felt the heat of unrest rising with each passing day. Meanwhile, the Flame Princess continued developing into a young woman whose destiny could no longer be contained. Her existence, kept secret for so long, became the unspoken symbol of change. Those who knew about her wondered what would happen if she ever gained her freedom. Some feared the chaos her power could unleash. Others believed she represented hope. Although she remained unaware of her significance, her presence created a tension that radiated through the palace. The king sensed this tension most of all. His fear of losing power grew stronger as his daughter matured. He increased the isolation around her, believing that if he could control her environment, he could control her destiny. Yet the more he tightened her confinement, the more volatile her power became. Her flames reacted to emotions she did not understand. The chamber that once contained her energy now struggled to withstand her growth. Guards outside her room felt heat fluctuations that signaled instability within. Scholars who monitored the princess's elemental aura understood the danger. They knew fire could not develop in isolation without consequences. They tried to warn the king. Their warnings were dismissed. Some scholars were removed from their positions. Others disappeared quietly. Knowledge became dangerous. Truth became a threat. The royal court grew silent as the king surrounded himself with individuals who reinforced his worldview. The third major sign of the kingdom's collapse emerged through connections beyond the Fire Kingdom. Other realms began noticing irregularities. Candy diplomats reported declining trade. Slime emissaries reported disruptions in exchanges of elemental resources. Even distant regions sensed a shift in the Fire Kingdom's energy. Fire's instability affected natural balances across U, causing fluctuations in elemental fields that were normally predictable. The Ice Kingdom, though distant and often hostile, also felt the change. Ice and fire are opposites connected through elemental cycles. When fire destabilizes, ice experiences disturbances. Reports surfaced of unusual temperature fluctuations in regions near fire borders. Although ice remained cautious, these disturbances signaled that something significant was happening within the Fire Kingdom. Internally, the Fire Kingdom reached a state where collapse became inevitable. The king's paranoia reached its peak when he attempted to extend his control into realms beyond the kingdom. He believed fire's nature required influence over other elements. He viewed diplomacy as a form of weakness. His aggressive ideology, influenced by earlier generations of the Emberblood lineage, led him to consider the possibility of asserting dominance. His plans, though never fully realized, alarmed his advisors. Even loyalists began questioning whether his rule would lead to elemental conflict. At this critical moment, the Flame Princess's introduction to the outside world sealed the kingdom's fate. Her encounter with Finn, a figure far removed from fire politics, provided her with a glimpse of a life her father never intended her to experience. Through this connection, she learned the value of compassion, friendship, and emotional truth. These lessons awakened her desire for identity beyond the chamber. She realized she could no longer remain confined. Her flame grew brighter with each new experience, no longer shaped by isolation but by connection. This growth, however, threatened the stability of the palace. The king recognized this threat. He sensed his daughter slipping beyond his control. His fear intensified. When he attempted to force her back into isolation, she resisted with a strength he had not anticipated. Her emotional surge destabilized the palace, triggering heat waves that spread through the volcanic corridors. Guards reported cracks in the stone. Scholars recorded spikes in elemental energy. The palace, built on centuries of tradition, began trembling under the force of her awakening. The conflict between father and daughter became the symbol of the kingdom's internal struggle. The king represented rigid control. The princess represented transformation. Their confrontation was not only personal, but elemental. Fire, suppressed for too long, now demanded release. This breaking point culminated in the escape of the flame princess from her chamber. When she was freed, whether through accident or intervention, her flames surged with the intensity of years of suppressed growth. The kingdom felt the impact instantly. Magma channels reacted, air vibrated with heat. Citizens felt a shift in their core. A new flame had emerged, one that could no longer be contained. The moment she left her chamber marked the beginning of the end for the old Fire Kingdom. Her existence challenged the authority of the Flame King. Her presence inspired citizens who had longed for change. Her power, once isolated, now illuminated the flaws of the monarchy. Fire had returned to its natural cycle of transformation. The kingdom was no longer the controlled environment the king had built. It had become a place ready for evolution. Every flame within it sensed the change. Citizens felt hope. Advisors reevaluated their loyalties. Guards questioned their orders. The king, realizing his control was slipping, responded with even more force. Yet every action he took only accelerated the collapse. The Fire Kingdom had reached the threshold of revolution. The next phase would not only reshape the monarchy, but redefine fire's role in Wu. The collapse that followed was not a tragedy, but a rebirth. Fire does not fear destruction. It emerges from it stronger, brighter, and truer to its nature. The Flame Princess stood at the center of this transformation. Her childhood had shaped her into a force capable of challenging a tyrant. Her awakening marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new path that would soon lead to her rightful place as ruler. The Fire Kingdom was already trembling when the Flame Princess took her first steps into the wider world. Her emergence destabilized everything the Flame King had built. The palace, once a fortress of rigid power, now echoed with uncertainty. Every flame in the kingdom seemed to flicker with new rhythm. The king sensed that something irreversible had begun, but even he could not anticipate how quickly the old order would collapse once fire was allowed to breathe again. To understand the fall of the Flame King, one must look not only at the moment of rebellion, but also at the accumulation of choices that brought the kingdom to the edge. His downfall was not a single event. It was a sequence of pressures that built slowly over time. Each decision he made pulled the kingdom farther from its true nature, and when those decisions met the awakening power of the Flame Princess, the fragile bonds holding the monarchy together finally snapped. The first stage of the Flame King's fall began with the change in atmosphere that spread through the kingdom after his daughter's release. Fire citizens, who previously moved through their days with rigid caution, began sensing a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, a feeling that their flames burned just a little brighter, that the heat pulses of the kingdom felt less suffocating. Citizens who had never questioned their routines now found themselves wondering why they had accepted such strict control for so long. The Flame King felt this shift as a threat. He had ruled through intimidation for years, believing that fear kept the kingdom stable. When he sensed that fear diminishing, he reacted by tightening his control further. He issued new orders to his guards, demanding enhanced patrols through the city. Flame Shapers were instructed to cease unauthorized gatherings. Scholars faced renewed scrutiny. Any sign of creative expression seen as rebellion was punished. Yet these new restrictions only revealed his desperation. At the same time, the Flame Princess was learning about the world through her interactions outside the palace. Her exposure to freedom awakened emotional truths she had never known. She realized that fire could coexist with other elements. She learned that strength did not require cruelty. Her time in the outside world taught her that identity was not defined by confinement or fear. These realizations reshaped her flame, giving it clarity and purpose. When she returned to the Fire Kingdom after these experiences, her presence alone symbolized transformation. Guards who once followed the king without question now looked at her with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Citizens whispered her name with hope. They sensed she carried the freedom they had been denied. The palace, long a place of oppression, crackled with tension as the king realized his daughter had gained independence beyond his control. The second stage of the king's fall began when he attempted to reassert authority over her. He had long believed his daughter's destiny belonged to him. In his mind, she was a weapon he could wield, a successor shaped by his philosophy. When he saw her newfound confidence, he panicked. He viewed her autonomy as rebellion. He attempted to confine her again, demanding that guards enforce his orders. But the princess was no longer the isolated child he had once controlled. Her power had matured. Her connection to others had strengthened her resolve. She refused to return to her prison. The confrontation between them ignited a surge of elemental energy that shook the palace. Heat waves rippled through the corridors. Magma in the interior walls bubbled with intensity. The king, infuriated by her resistance, attempted to overpower her. His flames flared violently, fueled by fear rather than strength. This confrontation was not a duel between father and daughter. It was a struggle between old and new fire. The king represented control, suppression, and the rigid order he had forced onto the kingdom. The princess represented renewal, connection, and the elemental truth that fire must transform. Every spark between them reflected the tension between these two opposing forces. Their clash reverberated across the kingdom. Citizens felt the shift in energy. Many fled to safer regions. Others watched from a distance, sensing that history was being rewritten. Scholars recorded unusual flame patterns throughout the kingdom. Guards, unsure of their loyalty, hesitated to intervene. For the first time, the Flame King realized he was alone. The fear that once gave him power now fueled his downfall. When the princess's flames surged beyond the level the king had anticipated, he understood that he could no longer contain her. She was not the weapon he intended her to be. She was a sovereign flame. She was the heir of fire. This realization shattered the core of his authority. His control depended on the belief that only he could wield the power necessary to lead the kingdom. Once citizens witnessed a superior flame rising in defiance, his legitimacy collapsed. The third stage of his downfall came from the citizens themselves. Though the kingdom did not erupt into open rebellion, a shift occurred that was more powerful than any armed uprising. Citizens began rejecting the king's ideology. They stopped viewing strength solely through dominance. They started valuing the emotional expression and creativity that had defined fire culture before his rule. The Flame Princess's actions inspired them to reclaim the parts of their identity that had been suppressed for generations. Small groups formed to practice old traditions in public again. Flame Shapers created art that reflected hope rather than fear. Children played more freely, their flames dancing through the air without restriction. Elders told stories of the kingdom's past before authoritarian rule. These subtle acts of reclaiming identity weakened the king's authority more effectively than any direct challenge. He found himself ruling a kingdom whose spirit he no longer controlled. In response, the king attempted to rally his guards to re-establish order, but loyalty had eroded. Some guards refused to carry out his commands. Others hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. A few quietly defected to support the princess. The king's authority evaporated each time a guard questioned his orders. Fire monarchy had always depended on personal strength, but even the strongest flame needs support to rule. Without the loyalty of the kingdom, the throne became a hollow symbol. Realizing his influence was fading, the Flame King tried one final act of desperate control. He confronted the princess publicly, attempting to shame her into submission. He declared himself the rightful ruler, insisting that the kingdom needed his dominant flame to remain strong. For a brief moment, the kingdom held its breath. The tension between them felt like the pause before a volcanic eruption. But when the Flame Princess stood her ground, her resolve reflected generations of suppressed flame-seeking release. Her voice carried the weight of her childhood, her longing for connection, and her compassion for the kingdom. She did not challenge him with violence, but with truth. Her presence alone revealed the king's tyranny. Her flame, bright and steady, contrasted with the king's increasingly erratic blaze. This moment marked the symbolic end of his reign. Citizens saw clearly what they had felt for years. The king had become a shadow of fire, consumed by fear, incapable of guiding the kingdom. His flame no longer inspired respect, it repelled it. His authority dissolved not through force but through recognition that he no longer embodied fire's essence. The final stage of his downfall came when he was removed from power by the very forces he once controlled. In the canonical timeline, Finn and Jake, acting on the belief that he posed a danger to U, helped neutralize his influence. Their actions, combined with the princess's resistance, led to his exile. The king, stripped of his throne and authority, became a relic of a past era. His removal allowed the elemental cycle of fire to shift. The kingdom, freed from suppression, began healing. His fall revealed an essential truth. Fire cannot be ruled through fear. It requires understanding, compassion, and balance. The Flame King failed because he imposed a rigid structure onto an element that must remain fluid. His misunderstanding of fire's identity created instability that ultimately consumed his reign. Yet his downfall was not the end of the Fire Kingdom. It was the beginning of a transformative era. Under the Flame Princess, a new vision of fire would rise. A vision rooted in freedom, emotional truth, and elemental harmony. The kingdom would rebuild, guided not by fear, but by the renewed strength of its people, and the wisdom of a ruler who understood what fire truly needed. The collapse of the Flame King's rule was not only a political shift, it was a cultural rebirth. Fire, long suppressed, began to breathe again. The kingdom's flame, once dimmed by authoritarian rule, now burned brighter than ever. When the Flame King fell, the Fire Kingdom entered an era of uncertainty that touched every corner of its society. Citizens found themselves standing at the edge of a transformation that had been building for generations. The oppressive heat of the old monarchy began to fade, replaced by a warmth rooted in possibility rather than fear. For the first time in a long while, fire could breathe. The kingdom, long confined within the rigid ideology of a single ruler, now awaited the emergence of a leader capable of understanding fire's true nature. That leader was the Flame Princess. Her rise to power was not immediate or effortless. Her childhood had left her with emotional wounds, gaps in her knowledge, and raw, unrefined power that needed careful guidance. She did not enter her role with the confidence of a seasoned monarch. Instead, she stepped into the kingdom uncertain of herself, but certain that she wanted something different for her people. This vulnerability made her rise, distinct from previous rulers. Fire had always embraced intensity, but for the first time, it embraced humility. The first challenge she faced was stabilizing her own flame. Years of isolation had left her with strong, unpredictable energy. Her flames responded quickly to emotion, shifting between bright bursts and trembling flickers. In public spaces, this volatility made citizens nervous. They admired her potential, but they also feared what might happen if she lost control. The Flame Princess recognized this fear and understood that she needed to earn her people's trust, not through power, but through balance. Her earliest days as heir were marked by intense personal work. She sought guidance from fire scholars who had survived the king's purge. These scholars, once silenced by the old regime, now found purpose in helping her shape her elemental gifts. They taught her flame meditation, emotional grounding, and techniques to stabilize heat output. She learned to feel the flow of fire in her body, to guide it with intention rather than impulse. These lessons did not come easily. She often faltered. Her flame flared unpredictably, yet each failure strengthened her resolve. Training with scholars helped her build internal stability, but she also needed to understand the kingdom she was meant to lead. For someone raised in isolation, the Fire Kingdom felt overwhelming. Its architecture towered above her, alive with shifting colours and molten textures. Its streets carried the scents of ash and sulphur mixed with the sweat of hard-working citizens. The sights, sounds, and sensations were as new to her as they were ancient to her people. She walked through the city with cautious fascination, absorbing everything. Her visits to the city became moments of profound change for both herself and the kingdom. Citizens who had long suffered under the Flame King watched her with a mixture of curiosity and hope. They saw a princess who walked among them without guards. They saw a ruler who paused to observe their work rather than command them. They saw a young woman who carried both strength and compassion. These moments softened the fear that had settled into their hearts during the king's reign. Yet admiration was not universal. Some fire citizens, shaped by years of authoritarian rule, believed strength required dominance. They doubted whether a compassionate ruler could maintain fire's identity. They whispered among themselves that the kingdom needed a flame of iron, not a flame of empathy. These doubts became the second challenge the Flame Princess faced. She needed to prove that kindness and strength were not opposites. She needed to redefine fire's identity for a new era. Her approach to leadership reflected her struggle to understand herself. She did not rule through decrees in her early days. Instead, she listened. She met with scholars, artisans, flame shapers, and ordinary citizens. She asked them about the kingdom's needs. She learned about the damage caused by her father's policies. She visited districts that had been neglected. She watched flame shapers work and asked them about their lost traditions. She observed children playing and realized how much freedom they lacked. Through these interactions, she discovered the true nature of her kingdom. The Fire Kingdom was not defined by its monarchy. It was defined by its people, their creativity, and their passion. Fire was not a tool of dominance, it was a community of individuals whose flames flickered with emotion, memory, and heritage. The kingdom needed a ruler who understood these truths. The Flame Princess began shaping her leadership based on what she learned, not what she inherited. Her desire for knowledge led her to rebuild the council her father had dismantled. She restored positions for artisans, scholars, and flame shapers, recognizing that the kingdom needed diverse voices to remain balanced. This new council reflected the cultural richness of the Fire Kingdom. It also symbolized a return to earlier eras when collaboration guided fire society. Citizens felt encouraged by this change. They sensed the kingdom regaining its equilibrium. One of her first major acts as heir was declaring an end to forced suppression of flame expression. She abolished restrictive laws that prevented citizens from performing creative flame dances, crafting molten art, or forming spontaneous gatherings. These actions accelerated the cultural rebirth already underway. The Fire Kingdom once again filled with flickering displays of artistry. Flame sculptures spiraled through the air, lava gardens regained their glow, communal flame performances returned to public squares. Citizens celebrated the rediscovery of traditions that had been nearly lost. This cultural revival strengthened the kingdom's unity, but it also highlighted the third challenge the Flame Princess faced. Fire is not only an element of creation, it is also an element of passion and conflict. With freedom restored, some citizens began expressing anger toward the previous monarchy. Older fire warriors who had been suppressed during the king's rule desired retribution. Younger fire citizens demanded immediate change in every district. Their passionate demands threatened to create new instability. The princess understood that unchecked passion could become destructive. She did not want the kingdom to destroy itself in its pursuit of freedom. To guide her people through this transitional period, she relied on the scholarly teachings she had received. She emphasized balance in public messages. She encouraged citizens to express themselves, but also to consider the impact of their actions. She became a living example of controlled flame, demonstrating that emotional truth did not require chaos. During this time, her relationship with Finn played a subtle but significant role in her personal development. His presence reminded her that strength could coexist with gentleness. He encouraged her to explore the world beyond fire and to trust her instincts. Although their relationship experienced challenges, their connection influenced her growth. It helped her understand that leadership required empathy as much as power. It also helped her recognize her own emotional values, preparing her for the decisions she would make as ruler. Her next major step was confronting the legacy of her father. Although he had been exiled, his influence lingered in the palace. His laws remained etched into stone. His guards remained in some positions. His ideology still lived in the minds of certain citizens who believed fire's strength depended on dominance. The princess knew she could not build a new era without acknowledging the old one. She did not seek vengeance. Instead, she pursued understanding. She studied her father's policies. She traced the collapse of fire culture under his rule. She recognized his strengths and weaknesses, learning what to embrace and what to reject. This introspective approach allowed her to shape a leadership identity rooted in clarity rather than reaction. Her decisions were not based on opposition to her father, but on alignment with fire's true nature. Her efforts to restore balance extended beyond cultural revival. She also addressed the kingdom's structural issues. Magma channels needed repair. Districts needed support. Guard structures required reorganization. She worked with flame shapers to rebuild weakened areas and to reinforce regions affected by years of neglect. These acts of reconstruction strengthened trust between the throne and the citizens. One of her most significant decisions involved reforming the royal guard. She dismissed individuals who remained loyal to her father's oppressive ideals. She fostered a guard culture rooted in protection rather than intimidation. The new guard emphasized service, compassion, and discipline. This shift ensured that future monarchs could not misuse the guard's authority as her father had. Despite the progress she made, the Flame Princess still faced internal conflict. She struggled with her identity, torn between her desire for peace and the fire within her that craved expression. This conflict emerged most visibly in moments of political tension. When confronted with opposition, her flames sometimes flared unpredictably. She feared repeating her father's mistakes, and this fear created pressure that undermined her confidence. Yet each challenge helped her understand that leadership did not require perfection. It required commitment. Over time, she developed a leadership style that balanced strength and compassion. She became a ruler who inspired rather than commanded. Her influence grew through example, not fear. Fire citizens respected her because she valued them. They followed her because they believed she carried their best interests. Her authenticity became her strongest flame. Under her influence, the Fire Kingdom experienced a period of transformation that scholars later described as the rebirth era. Creativity flourished, social structures strengthened, diplomacy improved. The kingdom's elemental balance began stabilizing. Fire's natural cycle of destruction and renewal had completed another loop. The kingdom emerged stronger, supported by a ruler who embraced fire's complexity rather than fearing it. This rebirth did not erase the wounds of the past, but it allowed the kingdom to heal. The Flame Princess proved that fire could lead through compassion. She showed that strength did not require cruelty. Her rise marked a new beginning for the Fire Kingdom, one rooted in balance, identity, and emotional truth. She did not become a perfect ruler, but she became the ruler fire needed. In her flame, the kingdom found hope. Her journey reflected the evolution of fire itself, shifting from suppression into freedom, from fear into growth, from darkness into renewal. The old Fire Kingdom had fallen. A new flame had taken its place, burning brighter than the one that came before. When the Flame Princess assumed leadership, the Fire Kingdom stood in a state of emotional and structural disarray. The old monarchy had left scars across every layer of society. Some wounds were visible in the damaged magma channels, the weakened palace walls, and the neglected neighbourhoods scorched by years of suppression. Other wounds ran deeper. Citizens struggled to trust authority. Families carried memories of repression. Artists and scholars bore the weight of their lost traditions. Fire children had grown accustomed to restraint rather than expression. The kingdom needed more than a new ruler. It needed a complete reconstruction, one that would reach beyond buildings and systems and rebuild the spirit of fire itself. The Flame Princess entered this challenge with determination shaped by her own journey. She had known isolation. She had known fear. She had known the loss of identity. Her childhood prepared her to understand the pain of her people. She recognized the signs of burnout in citizens whose flames burned too low from years of emotional suppression. She recognized the instability in those whose flames fluctuated because of uncertainty. Her leadership began not with grand declarations, but with a simple truth. Fire must be allowed to feel. This truth guided the first stage of reconstruction. The Flame Princess focused on healing the kingdom's emotional climate. She encouraged citizens to practice flame expression again, not for entertainment, but for restoration. Public spaces reopened for gatherings where fire dances, flame melodies, and ember performances flourished. Citizens who had learned to hide their flames began rediscovering confidence. These acts of expression served as communal therapy. Fire's emotional language returned, helping the kingdom process years of trapped energy. Yet emotional healing alone was not enough. The kingdom's infrastructure demanded immediate attention. Decades of authoritarian rule had left the fire, environment unstable. Magma channels that once flowed smoothly now surged unpredictably. In some regions, molten rivers cooled prematurely, causing blockages. In others, excessive pressure built beneath the surface. These irregularities threatened the safety of entire districts. The Flame Princess recognized the urgency and summoned flame shapers and heat regulators to assess the damage. The flame shapers, once suppressed by the Flame King, found new purpose. They mapped unstable zones, repaired cracked lava routes, and strengthened weakened foundations using advanced heat manipulation. Their return to prominence marked a significant shift in the kingdom's identity. In earlier eras, flame shapers were revered as keepers of artistic and geological stability. Under the new leadership, they regained this respected role. Their work became essential not only for safety, but for symbolic renewal. Every repaired channel, every restored pillar, every reinforced wall represented fire, rediscovering its creative strength. The reconstruction also extended to the palace itself. The Flame King had transformed the palace into a fortress driven by paranoia. Dark corridors, oppressive heat, and harsh architecture reflected his belief that fear maintained order. The Flame Princess refused to rule from such a place. She commissioned flame shapers and artisans to redesign the palace interior. They softened the harsh lines, widened corridors, and added windows crafted from transparent heat-tempered glass. These windows glowed with internal flame, but allowed the princess to view the kingdom she served. The palace became a place of openness rather than confinement. This transformation symbolized a broader cultural shift. Fire citizens recognized that their rulers were no longer insulated from the realities of daily life. The princess's willingness to inhabit a palace that welcomed light reflected her philosophy. Leadership should illuminate, not obscure. Leadership should remain connected, not shielded behind walls. The redesign sent a message to the kingdom. Fire would no longer be governed by fear. As reconstruction continued, the Flame Princess faced one of her greatest political challenges. She needed to unify the diverse factions that had emerged during her father's rule. Some citizens embraced her compassionate approach. Others, particularly older warriors and members of the aggressive Emberblood branch, remained skeptical. They believed strength required dominance. They questioned whether a young, emotionally expressive ruler could lead during times of crisis. Rather than dismissing their concerns, the princess met with these skeptics directly. She invited them to discuss their fears, their memories, and their hopes for the kingdom. Many came expecting to encounter weakness. Instead, they found a ruler who listened carefully, responded honestly, and demonstrated unwavering conviction. She assured them that compassion did not diminish strength. She emphasized that fire could protect without oppressing. Her sincerity moved many who had doubted her. Even those who remained uncertain came to respect her courage. Still, a small group of dissenters formed quietly in the background. These individuals believed the kingdom should return to a more authoritarian model. They feared that too much freedom would lead to chaos. They whispered that the Flame Princess lacked the ruthlessness required to maintain order. Their presence created tension, but they did not yet possess the influence to disrupt reconstruction. Their doubts, however, foreshadowed future challenges the princess would face as she continued reshaping the kingdom. One of the most profound changes she implemented involved education. Fire children had suffered deeply under the old regime. Their lessons focused on restraint and obedience rather than exploration and creativity. They were taught to fear their own flames. The Flame Princess understood the importance of addressing this. She reformed the fire schools, working with scholars and flame shapers to redesign the curriculum. Children learned flame control through play rather than punishment. They were encouraged to explore their abilities safely, guided by experienced mentors. These changes revitalized the next generation. Fire children began expressing emotions more freely, building confidence in their elemental identity. The princess also introduced a new institution within the kingdom, the Hall of Ember Memory. This hall served as a repository of fire history, including stories that had been erased or altered by the old monarchy. Scholars gathered artifacts, flame recordings, and oral histories from elders. They pieced together a more complete narrative of the kingdom's past, documenting the rise of the first monarchs, the lineage of Emberblood, the ancient elemental traditions, and the cultural evolution that defined the kingdom. This act of preservation helped fire citizens understand their heritage beyond their recent trauma. Knowledge became a tool of healing. During this period, the kingdom also re-established diplomatic relationships with neighbouring realms. Flame Princess understood that fire could not exist in isolation. She sent emissaries to Candy, Slime, and even Ice. Although the Ice Kingdom remained distant, tentative communication laid the foundation for future understanding. Diplomacy softened tensions across U. Trade resumed, bringing new materials and ideas into the kingdom. These interactions broadened the citizens' worldview and reinforced the idea that fire's strength came not from domination, but cooperation. Yet the most meaningful aspect of reconstruction was the gradual shift in the kingdom's emotional landscape. Fire citizens began to trust themselves again. They felt safe, expressing joy, anger, grief, and love without fear of punishment. They participated in festivals that celebrated the cycles of destruction and renewal. They rebuilt homes with designs inspired by ancient traditions and modern creativity. The kingdom's flames, once dimmed by suppression, burned with renewed warmth. The Flame Princess played an active role in this healing. She did not limit herself to palace duties. She attended festivals, visited schools, and helped repair damaged structures. Citizens often found her walking through the streets, listening to their stories, offering encouragement, or sharing quiet conversations with artisans. Her presence emphasized that leadership was not distant. Leadership was part of the community. In these interactions, she discovered something surprising. Fire citizens did not desire a perfect ruler. They desired a ruler who cared. They valued her vulnerability, her willingness to admit mistakes, and her determination to improve. This authenticity strengthened their loyalty far more effectively than fear ever could. The reconstruction also helped the princess deepen her understanding of her own identity. As she rebuilt the kingdom, she rebuilt herself. She confronted the pain of her childhood, recognizing how it shaped her insecurities. She learned to control her flames, not through suppression, but through emotional awareness. She accepted her strengths and weaknesses, realizing that both served her leadership in different ways. A significant milestone in her personal growth occurred when she visited the old chamber where she had been imprisoned. The room symbolized everything she had overcome. Standing within its stone walls, she felt a mixture of sorrow and strength. She understood that the chamber no longer defined her. She chose to transform it into a place of learning, where young fire citizens could study the dangers of emotional suppression and the importance of connection. This transformation demonstrated her ability to turn pain into purpose. As the Reconstruction era progressed, the kingdom regained stability. Magma channels flowed smoothly. Districts thrived. Cultural traditions flourished. The palace radiated warmth rather than fear. Fire citizens walked with confidence, their flames reflecting newfound freedom. The kingdom had risen from ash and ember, guided by a ruler who embraced both the beauty and complexity of fire. Yet reconstruction was only the beginning. The true test of the Flame Princess's leadership would come when fire itself faced a transformation far greater than any political shift. Elemental instability, ancient forces, and cosmic influences would soon shape the kingdom in ways no ruler could fully anticipate. The princess would encounter challenges that stretched beyond her personal history and the boundaries of her realm. But in this moment, as the Fire Kingdom rebuilt under her guidance, the kingdom discovered its heart again. The flame of renewal burned brightly, preparing the people for whatever future awaited them. Reconstruction brought warmth, hope, and renewal to the Fire Kingdom. Yet even as the Flame Princess healed her people and rebuilt her realm, a far older force stirred beneath the surface of Oo. This force did not belong to any single kingdom, nor was it shaped by the politics of monarchs or the will of citizens. It belonged to the ancient fabric of the world itself. The four primordials, representing fire, ice, candy, and slime, were beginning to surface again. Their awakening would trigger one of the most dramatic upheavals the Fire Kingdom had ever experienced. The elemental crisis was not the collapse of a political system. It was the unraveling of a cosmic balance. To understand the Fire Kingdom during this crisis, one must first understand the nature of elemental lineage. Every ruler tied to an element carries within them a piece of ancient identity passed through generations. These lineages are not symbolic titles. They are living forces that resonate with primal energy. The Flame Princess, as the current bearer of the fire elemental essence, held within her the spark that once belonged to her distant ancestor, the primordial fire elemental. This essence existed long before the Fire Kingdom formed, long before mortals created civilizations, and long before the world of Oo took its familiar shape. The Flame Princess had always felt the intensity of her elemental inheritance, though she did not understand it fully. Her flames burned hotter than those of ordinary fire citizens. Her emotional surges produced heat waves that rippled through distant regions. Scholars believed her presence stabilized the kingdom, but they also sensed that her power existed on a scale far greater than the monarchy. They documented fluctuations in her elemental aura, noticing that her flames shifted in response to cosmic disturbances more than emotional ones. These signs foreshadowed the awakening of the elementals, even if the scholars did not yet understand the connection. When the elemental crisis began, it did not announce itself with fanfare. It began as subtle shifts. The temperature of the Fire Kingdom fluctuated unpredictably. Areas that were usually stable became volatile. Magma streams surged and cooled at irregular intervals. Deep tremors shook the volcanic foundations, unsettling citizens and disrupting daily life. These tremors signaled a shift in the world's elemental balance, as if ancient forces were returning to reclaim what had once belonged to them. The Flame Princess felt the disturbance in a more personal way. Her flames fluctuated with unusual intensity. She experienced bursts of heat she could not explain, even when her emotions were calm. Her connection to the elemental essence felt heavier, as if an unseen presence was pressing against her mind. Scholars who monitored her aura reported surges of ancient fire that surpassed anything they had recorded before. These signs troubled the princess, but she remained dedicated to maintaining balance within the kingdom. As the crisis intensified, the first visible manifestation of elemental awakening appeared. A surge of ancient fire energy erupted through the outer districts, creating spirals of flames that twisted through the air without any citizen's influence. These flames did not obey the laws of modern fire magic. They moved with a consciousness of their own, forming patterns that resembled ancient symbols documented in the Hall of Ember Memory. Citizens responded with fear and awe. Some saw these flames as a sign of renewal. Others saw them as a threat. The Flame Princess faced the flames directly. She approached them with caution, sensing their connection to her lineage. The ancient fire recognized her presence, flickering in response to her aura. For a moment, the flames aligned with her own rhythm, as if acknowledging her as the contemporary vessel of fire. Yet as quickly as they recognized her, they surged violently outward, as though testing her control. The princess struggled to steady them. Her flames resonated with the ancient energy, causing seismic pulses that rattled the kingdom's foundations. This confrontation marked the beginning of a larger transformation. The awakening of the primordial fire elemental, who had once embodied the raw force of fire itself, sent waves of energy across U. Although the Fire Kingdom felt the effects most intensely, no region remained untouched. The Ice Kingdom froze in unnatural patterns. The Candy Kingdom experienced expansions of sweetness that defied logic. The slime regions fluctuated in liquidity. These shifts indicated that the elemental cycle had been disrupted, and that the ancient identities of the world were reclaiming dominance. The Flame Princess realized her kingdom was entering a phase she had never prepared for. The reconstruction she had begun focused on healing emotional wounds and rebuilding structural foundations. Now she faced a crisis that threatened the very existence of the Fire Kingdom's current form. She needed to understand her role in this elemental upheaval. Her first step was consulting scholars who had studied the ancient elementals. They examined centuries-old flame inscriptions and compared them with the patterns of ancient fire erupting across the kingdom. Their conclusion was clear. The primordial forces were awakening, and as the vessel of fire, the princess was central to the crisis. The elementals, once awakened, began exerting influence over their domains. In the Fire Kingdom, pockets of ancient fire formed spontaneously. These pockets created areas where modern fire behaviors broke down. Flames hovered without fuel. Magma solidified in mid-flow. Structures melted and reformed unpredictably. Citizens struggled to navigate this shifting landscape. Areas that were once safe became hazardous. Emergency crews struggled to maintain order. Yet the most profound manifestation of the fire elemental awakening came from within, the Flame Princess herself. Her flames grew stronger, hotter, and more intense. They responded not only to her emotions, but to the presence of other elementals across U. She felt bursts of sweetness when the candy elemental influenced the world. She felt cold pulses from distant ice. She felt the fluctuating pull of slime. These sensations overwhelmed her. She feared losing control and causing harm to her people. This fear became a catalyst for one of her most defining choices. She could not remain a passive vessel. She needed to confront the ancient fire directly. With the guidance of scholars and flame shapers, she journeyed to the heart of the kingdom, where the elemental core pulsed beneath layers of volcanic stone. The elemental core was a place where ancient fire energy accumulated. It glowed with the heat of ages and radiated the consciousness of the primordial fire elemental. When she reached the core, its energy reacted instantly. the chamber filled with spirals of fire that moved in patterns resembling memories. The ancient fire sought to reclaim the identity that had been diluted by centuries of mortal rule. It held no malice, only purpose. It recognized the Flame Princess as its successor, yet it challenged her to demonstrate her worth. This confrontation was deeply symbolic. It represented the clash between ancient fire and modern flame, between raw elemental instinct and the lived experience of a ruler shaped by compassion. The princess stepped forward, her flames rising to meet the ancient blaze. The core pulsed with intensity, pushing against her, testing her stability. She felt the weight of centuries pressing into her spirit, trying to merge with her identity. She refused to yield. Her flames stabilized as she anchored herself in her memories, her connections, and her values. The ancient fire surged again, this time enveloping her in waves of intense heat. She felt the pain of transformation, the loss of control, the pull toward a primal state. Yet she held on. She realized that fire was not only destruction, it was also renewal. It was emotion. It was connection. She channeled her compassion into her flame, allowing it to shape the ancient energy. Her fire expanded, not in fury, but in clarity. This moment marked a turning point. The elemental core recognized her strength, not through dominance, but through balance. It began merging its ancient fire with her modern flame, creating a harmonious essence that flowed through the kingdom. This union stabilized the Fire Kingdom's elemental field. The chaotic eruptions subsided. Magma flows normalized. Flames returned to their natural patterns. Citizens felt the kingdom grow calm again. However, this stabilization did not end the elemental crisis. The rising influence of the other elementals continued altering the world. The Fire Kingdom remained vulnerable to shifts in candy, ice, and slime forces. Yet the princess's confrontation with ancient fire gave her a deeper understanding of her role. She realized she was not merely a monarch, she was the guardian of fire's identity. Her purpose extended beyond political leadership. She was responsible for maintaining the elemental balance that held the world together. The elemental crisis reached its peak when the primordial candy elemental overtook U, transforming vast regions into sugar-based landscapes. Fire, ice, and slime struggled to maintain their influence. The Fire Kingdom, though protected by the princess's stabilized aura, experienced encroachment from swirling candy currents. Citizens became trapped in sweet crystalline structures. Lava rivers crystallized into candy shells. The kingdom's flames flickered beneath layers of sugary residue. The Flame Princess responded with determination. She led efforts to free citizens trapped in candy formations. She used her flame to melt sugar without harming those inside. She coordinated with other elemental vessels across U, recognizing that the crisis required cooperation. Her leadership during this phase revealed the extent of her growth. She balanced her elemental duty with her role as protector of her people. When the elemental crisis resolved and the ancient elementals returned to dormancy, the Fire Kingdom emerged changed. The kingdom's flames were calmer, more harmonious. The citizens felt renewed connection to their elemental identity. The princess, having confronted ancient fire, understood both the strength and vulnerability of her people more deeply than ever before. The crisis shattered the old balance, but it also forged a new one. The Fire Kingdom learned that its future depended not only on internal unity, but on cooperation with the elemental world beyond its borders. This realization would guide the kingdom through its final transformation and prepare it for the era that followed the elemental upheaval. When the elemental crisis finally faded, U felt like a place waking from a long and strange dream. The world had been reshaped by forces older than civilization, forces that remembered identities forgotten by mortals. When the primordial elementals went dormant again, they left behind a landscape that carried new marks of their temporary dominance. In the Fire Kingdom, the traces of ancient fire, candy crystallization, and elemental interference lingered long after the crisis ended. These remnants shaped the years that followed, forming a transitional era often remembered as the Quiet Years. The Fire Kingdom entered this period carrying two truths. First, it had survived a cosmic upheaval that tested every part of its identity. Second, its ruler now held a deeper connection to fire than any monarch in recent memory. The Flame Princess had confronted primordial fire directly, merging ancient identity with her own. This transformation expanded her flame, but also placed a new weight on her shoulders. She emerged stronger, steadier, and far more attuned to the world's elemental fabric. Yet she also carried the burden of knowing how fragile the balance of U truly was. The Quiet Years began with a profound sense of stillness. Citizens who had endured the collapse of the Flame King's rule felt a strange calm settling over the kingdom. The elemental instabilities that had rattled the foundations during the crisis slowed to gentle rhythms. Magma channels flowed with a steadiness that felt almost melodic. The air warmed in predictable pulses. Even the volcanic landscape seemed to exhale peacefully. The kingdom was not merely recovering, it was recalibrating. The Flame Princess approached these years with cautious optimism. She knew the kingdom needed time to rest and heal. She also understood that fire, after experiencing dramatic shifts in identity, required gentleness. She slowed the pace of major reforms, choosing instead to observe how her people adapted to the new elemental balance. She spent long hours in meditation, allowing the echoes of ancient fire within her to settle into harmony with her emotions. Scholars monitored fluctuations in her elemental aura and noted that her flame had adopted a deeper, more stable hue. One of the first major efforts during the Quiet Years involved clearing the remnants of candy crystallization left by the candy elemental's influence. Some regions of the kingdom had been coated in layers of hardened sugar that interfered with magma flow and elemental conductivity. Fire crews developed techniques to melt the crystallization safely, using controlled bursts of heat combined with elemental dampening. These cleanup efforts became community events. Citizens worked together, forging new bonds through shared labor. The process revealed a truth about fire society that had long existed but had been overlooked under the old monarchy. Fire citizens are naturally cooperative. Their flames, though intense, resonate instinctively with one another. When they work side by side, their heat patterns synchronize, creating a communal rhythm that strengthens bonds within the kingdom. This cooperation, once suppressed, now flourished. The cleanup efforts became symbolic of fire's willingness to embrace unity and renewal. During this time, the Flame Princess deepened her relationship with her people. She visited districts still recovering from elemental shifts, offering support and reassurance. She spent time with flame shapers who were redesigning public spaces to reflect the kingdom's evolution. She listened to families whose homes had been disrupted by the crisis. These interactions shaped her understanding of leadership during peace. She realized that guiding a kingdom through stillness required as much wisdom as guiding it through chaos. As the Quiet Years unfolded, fire culture softened in meaningful ways. Festivals that celebrated destruction now emphasized renewal. Dance troupes created performances that told the story of the crisis, using gentle flame patterns to represent cooperation among the elements. Artisans crafted sculptures that blended molten textures with echoes of candy crystallization, symbolizing resilience. Children played games, inspired by the elemental transformations they had witnessed, approaching them with curiosity rather than fear. This cultural softening represented a significant shift from earlier eras. Fire had once been defined by dominance, aggression, and intensity. The Flame King's rule had amplified these traits, turning them into tools of control. After the crisis, fire discovered a quieter strength rooted in emotional expression. Fire citizens learned that gentleness could coexist with power. Their flames became symbols of connection rather than intimidation. These changes influenced the kingdom's diplomatic relationships. Candy, slime, and even ice approached the Fire Kingdom with newfound respect. Diplomats who visited the palace noted the calm atmosphere that permeated its halls. They observed the openness of its architecture, the warmth of its citizens, and the shift in elemental energy. They recognized that fire was no longer a threat. It was a partner in maintaining balance across U. Yet the quiet years were not without challenges. Some citizens struggled with the changes. Older fire warriors, who had lived through eras defined by conflict, felt uncertain in this new environment. They wondered whether fire was losing its edge. They questioned whether softness would weaken the kingdom. These concerns reflected a tension between tradition and transformation. The Flame Princess addressed these fears with honesty. She met with concerned groups, acknowledging their worries while explaining that strength did not require aggression. She emphasized that fire's identity had expanded, not diminished. During this era, the princess also confronted her lingering insecurities. Her childhood imprisonment had left scars that did not disappear easily. She struggled with moments of doubt, fearing she might lose control of her flame or repeat her father's mistakes. These fears deepened when she experienced unexpected elemental surges triggered by residual traces of the crisis. At times, her flame flared unpredictably, responding to echoes of ancient fire that had not fully dissipated. Rather than hiding these moments, she chose to work through them publicly. She consulted scholars, practiced advanced flame meditation, and trained with experienced flame shapers. Her willingness to address her vulnerabilities openly strengthened her connection to the kingdom. Citizens saw a ruler who did not pretend to be perfect, but strived to grow and understand herself. This authenticity reinforced their trust. The elemental crisis had also left lasting effects on the environment surrounding the Fire Kingdom. Some regions where ancient flame energy had erupted developed new ecosystems. Pockets of fire-infused moss grew along volcanic ridges. Lava pools formed crystalline layers that emitted soft melodic tones when touched by heat. These phenomena fascinated scholars and attracted artists who sought inspiration in their unusual beauty. The kingdom gradually embraced these anomalies as part of its evolving identity. During the quiet years, the Flame Princess devoted time to exploring these new environments. She often travelled with small groups of scholars to study the effects of ancient fire on the landscape. These journeys allowed her to strengthen her connection to the larger elemental world and to understand how fire interacted with the remnants of other elements. She learned to sense shifts in the earth that indicated elemental imbalance. She discovered flame patterns that hinted at ancient languages. These insights enriched her understanding of fire's place in the world. One of the most significant transformations during this era involved the kingdom's approach to elemental education. Children who had once been taught rigid control now learned to understand their flames through emotional awareness. Schools introduced lessons on the history of the elementals, teaching young fire citizens how ancient forces shaped the world. Students practiced exercises that encouraged empathy, self-regulation, and creative flame expression. These lessons fostered a generation of fire citizens who understood both the strength and responsibility of their elemental identity. The quiet years also strengthened the princess's relationships with individuals outside her kingdom. Her interactions with Finn evolved into moments of mutual growth. Although their romantic connection weakened over time, their friendship deepened. Finn continued to treat her with honesty and respect, offering support during difficult moments. Their bond served as a reminder that fire could form meaningful connections beyond its borders. As peace settled across U, the Flame Princess began to dream about the future. She envisioned a kingdom defined not by fear, but by compassion. She wanted fire to become a source of stability in the elemental balance rather than a catalyst for conflict. She imagined new institutions that would preserve cultural memory. She envisioned artistic movements that blended ancient and modern flame expression. These dreams guided her decisions during the quiet years. Yet beneath this calm, subtle shifts hinted that the world was preparing for another transformation. Distant forces beyond the Fire Kingdom began stirring again. Cosmic truths that had been dormant since the elemental crisis whispered through the veins of U. Ancient identities, though weakened, were not fully gone. The princess sensed faint tremors that echoed through her flame, signaling that the peace she cultivated might not last forever. Still, the quiet years remained a cherished period in the history of the Fire Kingdom. Fire citizens flourished. The kingdom softened, without losing its essence. Families grew in peace. Art thrived. Flame shapers created beauty rather than destruction. Scholars explored knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. Children awakened to a world that welcomed their creativity. These years shaped a generation that believed in transformation and balance. They prepared the kingdom for the challenges that would come later. More importantly, they revealed the Flame Princess not only as a ruler of fire, but as a guardian of its heart. The kingdom's flame glowed gently during this time, reflecting a rare moment of harmony. It was a period when fire rested, breathed, and remembered what it meant to feel. The quiet years carried the Fire Kingdom into a period of reflective growth, but even the gentlest eras contain currents of change moving beneath the surface. Fire, by its nature, cannot remain still forever. It flickers, shifts, and reshapes itself. As decades passed, and U drifted toward the far future, the Fire Kingdom began experiencing subtle transformations that hinted at a fate very different from the one its people believed they were building. These transformations did not come from political upheaval or external invasion. They came from the slow evolution of elemental identity and the passage of time itself. To understand the Fire Kingdom's final transformation, one must begin with the nature of elemental influence. Every element evolves through cycles. Creation, stabilization, disruption, and renewal repeat endlessly across history. The Fire Kingdom, having survived an authoritarian collapse and a cosmic crisis, entered a stage of long-term renewal that gradually altered its foundations. Some of these changes were visible, like the warming of distant volcanic fields or the emergence of new flame-based ecosystems. Others occurred quietly in the hearts of fire citizens, whose understanding of their identity continued to expand beyond the rigid definitions of earlier eras. As the Flame Princess matured, she devoted herself to guiding this long era of transformation. Her reign became synonymous with introspection and cultural flourishing. She encouraged citizens to explore new artistic expressions, experiment with elemental techniques, and collaborate with scholars from distant lands. The kingdom became more open than ever before, welcoming travelers from Candy, Slime, and even regions touched by ice. This openness enriched fire culture, blending ancient traditions with new influences. Yet, as fire grew more interconnected with the world, subtle shifts began appearing in its elemental energy. Scholars in the Hall of Ember Memory recorded fluctuations in the kingdom's flame resonance. These fluctuations were not chaotic like those of the elemental crisis. Instead, they resembled a gradual softening, a slow reshaping of fire's rhythm. Volcanoes burned with gentler heat. Lava rivers flowed steadily rather than surging. The air carried a warmth that felt nurturing rather than intense. These changes reflected the emotional evolution of fire citizens who had embraced compassion more deeply than any generation before them. Some fire elders worried that the kingdom was losing its elemental edge. They believed fire should burn fiercely and feared that prolonged peace might extinguish the passion that defined them. But younger citizens saw the changes differently. They believed the kingdom was evolving toward a more resilient identity, one defined by emotional wisdom rather than aggression. They celebrated the gentler tone of their culture, seeing it as evidence that fire had learned to express itself without causing harm. During this time, the Flame Princess experienced her own transformation. Her elemental connection, once turbulent and overwhelming, now pulsed with continuity. The ancient fire within her had settled into harmony with her emotions, creating a flame more stable than any ruler had carried in centuries. She no longer feared her power. She understood its rhythms completely and guided it with calm intention. This mastery made her a symbol of balance, not only to her people, but to all of U. The princess spent these years deepening her understanding of the world beyond fire. She travelled across U in quiet journeys that scholars later documented through personal accounts and preserved flame recordings. She visited regions she had only heard about in stories and sought conversations with individuals from all walks of life. She met the descendants of allies, the caretakers of sacred places, and communities shaped by elements different from her own. These encounters enriched her philosophy and influenced her leadership. One particularly important journey took her to regions shaped by cosmic remnants of the elemental crisis. She studied ancient flame echoes that remained embedded in distant volcanic stone and explored environments influenced by residual candy crystallization. These studies revealed something unexpected. The world itself was changing. The elemental identities of U were gradually blending, evolving into forms that no longer resembled the strict boundaries of earlier eras. Fire, candy, slime, and ice were transitioning toward new equilibrium, guided by the memories of their primordial identities, but shaped by centuries of mortal influence. This revelation influenced the princess's view of her own kingdom. She understood that fire could not remain static while the world evolved. The Fire Kingdom needed to prepare for a future where elemental identities interacted in ways no previous generation had experienced. She shared this understanding with scholars and council members, encouraging them to consider how fire could adapt without losing itself. Under her guidance, the kingdom established new institutions dedicated to studying elemental evolution. Scholars documented subtle changes in flame behavior. Flameshapers experimented with blending fire techniques with influences from other elements. Artisans created pieces that symbolized elemental unity. Children were taught that fire existed within a spectrum of identities rather than as an isolated force. These educational shifts prepared future generations for the transformations ahead. As U approached the distant future seen in the stories of Shermy and Beth, the Fire Kingdom underwent changes that extended beyond cultural evolution. The landscape itself transformed. Ancient volcanoes cooled gradually. Some magma channels deep beneath the kingdom crystallized into new geological formations. Flame ecosystems developed traits influenced by generations of emotional expression, producing flora and fauna that responded to gentle flame rhythms. These changes reflected an elemental identity that had softened naturally over time. The palace, which had once been reshaped to reflect openness and clarity, became a center of learning rather than political authority. Flame Princess, though still revered, adapted her role to reflect the kingdom's evolving understanding of leadership. She reduced her reliance on formal power structures, allowing communal governance to play a larger role. Fire citizens developed self-regulated communities that prioritized collaboration and elemental stewardship. The princess shifted toward a guiding role, serving as a spiritual figure more than a traditional monarch. Eventually, fire society transitioned into a phase where individual flames carried the wisdom of generations. Citizens no longer needed a centralized ruler in the way earlier eras had demanded. Their cultural identity, once fractured by fear, had become unified through shared understanding, emotional resilience, and communal values. Fire no longer feared vulnerability. It embraced transformation. The transition from monarchy to communal governance did not occur through revolution. It happened naturally as the princess aged and as fire citizens learned to sustain themselves through cooperation. Scholars from other kingdoms noted that no records documented a formal abdication. Instead, the Flame Princess gradually stepped back from day-to-day leadership, allowing the kingdom to guide itself. She became a mentor, a teacher, and a guardian of fire traditions. The final transformation of the Fire Kingdom took place long after her era of active leadership. In the distant future of Shermy and Beth, no sign of the monarchy remained. Yet the elemental influence of fire continued to thrive in the ruins and landscapes shaped by centuries of flame. This future reflected the natural conclusion of the kingdom's evolution. Fire had moved beyond hierarchical structures into a state of elemental presence woven into the world itself. Although the details of the Fire Princess's final years remain unrecorded, scholars agree on one truth. Her influence persisted through every flame that flickered in the far future. Her teachings shaped the emotional resilience of fire citizens. Her balance tempered the kingdom's elemental identity. Her compassion guided fire from an era of aggression into an era of harmony. In this way, her legacy extended far beyond her lifetime. The Fire Kingdom's transformation can be understood as a poetic cycle. It rose through elemental creation. It fractured under tyranny. It rebirthed through compassion. It softened through peace. And it dissolved gracefully into the world as a continued flame rather than a physical kingdom. Fire did not disappear. It evolved into something broader than borders, palaces, or political structures. It became a memory carried by the world, a warmth that pulsed through the future. The final transformation was not a tragic ending. It was the fulfillment of fire's nature. Fire does not cling to form. It moves forward, reshaping itself with each era. The Fire Kingdom honored this truth in its last stage, becoming not a place, but a living legacy shaped by generations of emotion, creativity, and renewal. And within that legacy, the quiet flame of the princess endured as a symbol of what fire had become. The distant future of the world seen through the eyes of Shermy and Beth, stands as one of the quietest yet most profound transformations in Adventure Time's canon. It is a future shaped by countless cycles of elemental disturbance, cultural evolution, decay, and renewal. In this era, familiar kingdoms have become echoes of their former selves. Landmarks are worn down or half buried. Histories that once defined entire civilizations have softened into myth. Among these changes, the Fire Kingdom stands as one of the clearest examples of how time reshapes not only land, but identity. By the age of Shermy and Beth, the Fire Kingdom that once burned brightly under the Flame Princess no longer exists as a structured political realm. Instead, what remains of fire lives in scattered traces across the landscape and in the elemental rhythm of itself. This disappearance is not a mystery of destruction, but a story of evolution. It reflects fire's true nature. Fire never stays, confined to a single form. It expands, changes, and disperses. When the Flame Kingdom dissolved by the far future, it was not erased. It simply shifted beyond the need for walls, monarchs, and centralized identity. The age of Shermy and Beth provides subtle clues that reveal how fire transitioned from a kingdom to a presence woven throughout the land. To understand the Fire Kingdom in this era, one must first understand the state of The land has weathered an immeasurable passage of time. Forests have grown over ruins, rivers have changed course, cities have crumbled and been reclaimed by nature or reshaped by new life forms. Creatures descended from familiar species roam freely, adapted to a world that no longer resembles the landscapes known by Finn, Jake, and their companions. In this environment, the elemental forces of remain active, but they express themselves differently. Fire, ice, candy, and slime exist not as centralized nations, but as diffuse influences blending into the natural world. When Shermy and Beth explore they encounter ancient structures whose origins are unclear to them, but recognizable to viewers. Some of these ruins bear traces of fire's old architecture, shaped by lava, channeled through volcanic stone. These structures no longer function as they once did. Their magma flows have cooled or crystallized. Their flame conduits, once glowing with elemental energy, now lie dormant or converted into new ecosystems. Small fire flora, remnants of the kingdom's evolutionary lineage, cling to cracks in the stone or nestle in heat pockets beneath the surface. These remnants signal that fire is still alive, even if the kingdom no longer stands. One of the most notable aspects of the far future is that elemental beings still exist, but their influence has changed. The future presents the elemental fusion Golb-turned-peace entity as a central force. This transformation reshaped the world in ways that are not fully shown, but are heavily implied. If a powerful entity influenced by Betty's sacrifice altered the cosmic order of then the elements themselves would naturally recalibrate. The balance between them, once fragile and prone to dramatic shifts, appears more stable in the age of Shermy and Beth. This stability suggests that fire, along with the other elements, has settled into a state that does not require concentrated kingdoms to maintain identity. The disappearance of the Fire Kingdom can be understood through this lens. The Flame Princess once symbolized the living vessel of fire's essence. Her leadership stabilized her element after the elemental crisis. Yet no elemental vessel is immortal. When she passed from history, the fire essence within her likely dispersed back into the world, as elemental identities often do when their vessels' lives conclude. This dispersal would have allowed fire to spread across more evenly, rather than pooling in a single region. Over centuries, this distribution of fire energy would reshape ecosystems, create new species, and convert former volcanic territories into calmer thermal zones. The kingdom's central purpose would fade naturally. Though the Fire Kingdom no longer exists as a political entity, its influence is evident in certain environmental features that appear subtly throughout the future landscape. Hot springs nestled within volcanic ridges suggest lingering elemental heat. Geothermal vents patterned with ember-coloured moss speak of fire-infused flora. In some regions, the ground glows faintly at night, illuminated by minerals, altered by centuries of elemental presence. These phenomena, while no longer linked to culture or society, echo the kingdom that once thrived in those lands. They serve as reminders that fire adapts and transforms, even when structures fall. The absence of fire citizens in the far future is another reflection of elemental evolution. Fire people, once concentrated within the Fire Kingdom, likely dispersed across U over generations. Their descendants may have blended with other elemental communities, evolved into new forms, or merged into diverse societies that adapted to the changing world. Fire, once personified, may have returned to a state closer to its primal nature, existing more as a force than as a species. This evolution mirrors the transitions seen in other elements, where identity is not lost but reshaped. A key clue to understanding the fate of the Fire Kingdom lies in the emotional tone of the far future. It carries a sense of calm resilience, a gentle acceptance of change that reflects the philosophical growth U underwent in the ages after the original series. This emotional landscape mirrors the quiet transformation the Flame Princess encouraged during her reign. Her influence, while not preserved through monuments or stated histories, persists in the nature of the elemental balance itself. Fire no longer threatens the world through instability or tyranny. It no longer dominates through force. Instead, it becomes part of the natural harmony of U's future, burning softly within the land, rather than blindingly above it. Some scholars in the far future interpret the ruins of the Fire Kingdom as sacred sites. Creatures who dwell in warm biomes may instinctively gravitate toward regions of old volcanic resonance, unaware that they are retracing the paths once walked by fire citizens. These creatures, shaped by the evolution of elements, carry ember patterns in their physiology that resemble ancient fire motifs. Their existence serves as another testament to how fire adapted over time. In the age of Shermy and Beth, the lack of centralized fire authority reflects a world that no longer depends on monarchies or strong elemental vessels. Balance has become diffuse rather than concentrated. Instead of relying on a single heir to connect with primordial forces, the world sustains itself through equilibrium, shaped by countless generations of elemental interaction. In this environment, kingdoms are no longer necessary. Identity becomes decentralized. Yet the Fire Kingdom's legacy survives in several ways. It lives in the geological formations shaped by ancient magma flows. It lives in the flora that glows with ember light. It lives in pockets of warmth scattered across U's future landscape. It lives in stories told by those who find ruins and wonder what great flame once stood there. It lives in the sense of emotional resilience that defines the era. Most importantly, the Fire Kingdom's legacy lives through the elemental balance that persists into the far future. The world remains whole, its elements integrated rather than in conflict. This balance is a direct consequence of the era shaped by the Flame Princess. Her compassion and introspection set a tone that resonated through centuries. Even in the distant future, her influence can be felt in the gentleness with which fire rests within the world. The age of Shermy and Beth is not an age of kingdoms. It is an age of memory. It is an age where the remnants of old civilizations serve as quiet reminders of what U once was. In this age, the Fire Kingdom holds a place of honor within the landscape, not through monuments or rulers, but through the subtle warmth it left behind. Fire continues to glow beneath the surface of the land, a soft pulse that carries the memory of an era shaped by struggle, compassion, and transformation. In this sense, the Fire Kingdom does not end. It transcends. It becomes part of the world's breath, part of its quiet stability, part of the natural rhythm that guides long after the names of kings and queens fade from memory. The Fire Kingdom's transformation into a dispersed elemental presence represents the culmination of everything fire learned over its long history. Fire discovered that strength can soften, that passion can flow gently, and that identity can endure even when structures fall. By the time Shermy and Beth walk the world, fire has become a whisper rather than a roar, a warmth rather than a blaze, a presence rather than a place. And that presence burns steadily, carried deep within the future of By the time the Fire Kingdom's story reaches its quiet conclusion, its transformation stands as one of the most profound arcs in the world of Its journey spans eras of creation, tyranny, renewal, and dissolution. Its rulers shaped the flow of elemental history. Its citizens carried flame traditions through generations marked by upheaval and discovery. Although the physical kingdom no longer exists in the distant future, its impact continues to resonate across landscapes, cultures, and elemental currents. The Fire Kingdom's legacy is not contained within borders or monuments. Instead, it endures as a living influence that shaped in ways both subtle and enduring. The Fire Kingdom's earliest legacy lies in its role as the vessel of fire's consciousness. Before it became a political realm, fire existed as primordial energy guided by the ancient fire elemental. The kingdom emerged as a manifestation of that elemental identity, giving fire both physical form and cultural expression. Its people developed traditions, technologies, and philosophies that embodied flame's emotional depth. For centuries, their lives reflected fire's complexity, its capacity for warmth and destruction, its cycles of instability and creativity. Understanding the Fire Kingdom's legacy begins with recognizing its role as the home of a living element. One of the most enduring aspects of this legacy is the memory of the Flame Princess, whose leadership redefined what fire could become. Her rise marked a turning point. She inherited a kingdom wounded by oppression and destabilized by ancestral power. She carried within her an elemental flame shaped by cosmic forces. Yet, instead of ruling through fear or dominance, she chose compassion. Her decisions guided the kingdom through healing, reconstruction, and introspection. She restored fire's emotional truth and helped her people rediscover their identity. This transformation became the foundation of fire's future evolution. Her story became part of the cultural memory of Even in the distant future, long after her name faded from common knowledge, the emotional philosophy she cultivated lived on. Fire's legacy changed because she changed it. Before her, fire was often defined by aggression. After her rule, fire embraced balance. Her leadership softened the kingdom, taught citizens to express emotions without fear, and encouraged cooperation with other elemental realms. This shift influenced the world far beyond her lifetime. The Fire Kingdom's legacy is also preserved through its cultural contributions. Fire citizens created flame dances, molten sculptures, ember rituals, and volcanic architecture that reflected their heritage. These artistic traditions shaped the landscapes and communities of Some structures survived well into future eras, becoming ruins explored by wanderers like Shermy and Beth. The patterns etched into volcanic rock, the remnants of magma-forged pillars, and The traces of flame stylizations across ancient archways reveal the kingdom's artistic soul. These silent remnants demonstrate that fire's creativity left marks that endured even as the kingdom itself faded. Another part of the Fire Kingdom's legacy is its contribution to elemental balance. During the elemental crisis, the Flame Princess confronted ancient fire directly, ensuring that modern fire harmonized with primordial identity. Her actions stabilized the world and prevented fire from overwhelming other elements. This stability influenced the centuries that followed. Even when kingdoms dissolved and the elemental vessels passed from memory, the balance she helped restore continued shaping U's natural order. Without her guidance, the far future of the world might have been far less stable. The kingdom also left a philosophical legacy that shaped future generations. Fire citizens developed a deep understanding of emotional awareness. Their flame-based practices taught them to navigate passion, vulnerability, and self-reflection. These teachings influenced communities beyond fire culture, especially in the centuries following the elemental crisis. Scholars from Kandy, Slime, and distant regions studied fire's emotional techniques, incorporating them into broader educational traditions. This sharing of wisdom helped create a world that valued balance over dominance. Fire's influence can also be seen in the way U evolved physically. Regions once controlled by volcanoes softened into thermal zones where ecosystems adapted to gentle heat rather than intense flame. Fire-infused flora and fauna developed traits passed down from centuries of elemental shaping. Ember moss, fire-blooming orchids, and thermal beetles continued to inhabit these regions long after the kingdom dissolved. These species embodied fire's resilience and adaptability, reminding the world that fire remained alive even without centralized rule. Perhaps the most significant part of the Fire Kingdom's legacy lies in the transformation of fire's reputation. Long ago, fire was feared. It was seen as volatile, destructive, and unpredictable. Under the Flame King, this fear intensified. His reign confirmed the belief that fire could not be trusted, but the centuries that followed reshaped this perception. Through compassion-based leadership, cultural expansion, and elemental balance, fire became a symbol of emotional strength and renewal. This shift shaped how other communities related to fire and influenced the way fire integrated into the world long after the monarchy ended. The distant future seen in the era of Shermy and Beth confirms this transformation. Although the Fire Kingdom no longer exists, fire persists peacefully across the landscape. It no longer appears as a threat or an isolated force. Instead, it blends naturally into the environment, creating warm pockets of life. These pockets serve as quiet reminders of the kingdom that once stood. They represent fire's legacy, not as a political power, but as a presence infused into the world's core. This soft legacy contrasts sharply with the dramatic eras of fire's past. Gone are the days of flaming armies and erupting volcanoes shaped by rulers. Gone are the tensions between elemental forces. Instead, fire breathes with the world, integrated into ecosystems, memories, and emotional rhythms. This form of fire reflects the lessons learned throughout the kingdom's long history. Fire discovered gentleness. It discovered balance. It discovered how to exist without dominating. Even though the Fire Kingdom dissolved, its values survived. The emotional philosophy it championed influenced the future of U at large. Communities built after the kingdom's fall adopted practices that emphasized emotional communication and resilience. These communities learned from the legacy of Flame that strength is not found in control but in understanding. Fire's greatest teaching became a universal truth. Emotional honesty brings stability. Another aspect of the kingdom's legacy is the moral clarity it brought to the concept of rulership. The contrast between the Flame King's tyranny and the Flame Princess's compassion became a lesson preserved through stories passed down across centuries. These stories, even when their details faded into myth, carried the message that leadership rooted in fear leads to collapse, while leadership rooted in empathy leads to renewal. This lesson influenced how later societies structured their governance and judged those who sought power. As U evolved, the flame of memory continued to flicker in subtle ways. Travelers discovered warm stones carved with ancient fire patterns. Scholars found preserved flame recordings in long hidden vaults of the Hall of Ember Memory. Creatures in the far future displayed ember-coloured markings reminiscent of fire citizens. These signs revealed that the Fire Kingdom's influence had not vanished. It had transformed into something deeper, something woven into the world's elemental tapestry. In this way, the Fire Kingdom achieved a kind of immortality that few realms in U attained. Its buildings crumbled, its monarchies ended, its citizens dispersed, yet its identity endured through the land itself and through the emotional evolution of the world. Fire had learned, across centuries, that survival did not require permanence. It required transformation. The final truth of the Fire Kingdom's legacy lies in this acceptance of change. Fire embraced cycles of destruction and rebirth. It embraced vulnerability and growth. It embraced the idea that identity does not need to remain rigid to stay meaningful. This fluidity allowed fire to evolve into a presence that endured long after borders dissolved. The Fire Kingdom taught U that change is not a threat. It is the natural rhythm of existence. By the time Shermy and Beth explore the future, fire's legacy burns, gently beneath the world they traverse. They may not know the history behind the warmth they feel or the ruins they stumble upon, but those remnants carry the memory of a kingdom that shaped U's heart. The Fire Kingdom story does not end in disappearance. It ends in integration, a quiet merging of elemental identity with the broader world. The kingdom's ultimate legacy is the enduring warmth it left behind, a warmth born from centuries of struggle, compassion, and transformation, a warmth that continues to glow softly in the far future, long after the last flame of the old monarchy faded, a warmth that reminds the world of who they once were and who they became.